128 times. That's how many times Kenny McCormick has died across the South Park franchise. 128 deaths. Shot, stabbed, crushed, impaled, eaten, exploded, trampled, electrocuted, disintegrated, spontaneously combusted, mauled by wild animals, thrown through a ceiling by Michael Jackson, and, my personal favorite, had his heart surgically replaced with a baked potato by a doctor played by George Clooney. And here's what kills me about all of it. No pun intended. Almost nobody remembers any of them. Not the characters on the show, not his friends, not his parents. Every single time Kenny dies, the world resets. Stan yells, Kyle curses, the rats come, and then next week, there he is again, standing at the bus stop in that orange parka like nothing ever happened. And nobody bats an eye. That's not a running gag. That's existential horror dressed up in construction paper. So tonight, we're doing something that I've wanted to do for a long time. We're going through every single Kenny death. Not just the big ones, not just the famous ones, all of them, season by season. From the very first alien blast on August 13th, 1997, all the way through to the gunshot from a police officer in the pandemic special. We're going to talk about what each death means, how they changed over time, how Trey Parker and Matt Stone went from a cheap shock gag to something that, if you look at it long enough, starts to feel like one of the most sustained philosophical experiments in the history of television. Because I think Kenny's deaths tell you more about South Park than almost anything else in the show. They tell you about the show's relationship with violence, with empathy, with consequence, with God. They tell you about what happens when a joke stops being funny and starts being something else entirely. So if you're watching this late at night, grab your blanket, get comfortable, settle in. This is going to be a long one. And before we go any further, I'd just like to kindly ask you to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos. Now let's start where everything started. Not with the show, but with two guys, some construction paper, some glue, and a very old 8mm camera. Before South Park was South Park, it was a 4-minute student film made in December of 1992 at the University of Colorado. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, working under the name Avenging Conscience Films, animated a short called The Spirit of Christmas, often referred to as Jesus versus Frosty. And here's a weird piece of trivia that most people don't know. In that original short, the character who looks like Cartman, the fat kid in the red jacket, was actually named Kenny. And the character in the orange parka, he was unnamed. So the original Kenny was Cartman, and the original death gag was attached to a completely different looking character. Parker and Stone animated the whole thing with construction paper, glue, and that old camera, and they premiered it at a student film screening. The story is simple. The kids build a snowman, it comes to life, it starts killing them. Jesus shows up and saves the day. And the Kenny character, again looking like Cartman, gets killed by Frosty. The unnamed Parka kid dies too. And at the end, a goat sniffs the Parka kid's corpse as the survivors walk away talking about how the true meaning of Christmas is presents. I think about that a lot, that the very first version of this gag wasn't just a death, it was a death that nobody cared about. The remaining kids don't mourn, they don't even really acknowledge it, they just walk away talking about Christmas presents. That callousness, that complete emotional disconnect between violence and reaction, that was there from day one, before the show, before Comedy Central, before any of this. 3 years later, in 1995, Fox executive Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone $2,000 to make another animated short he could send to friends as a video Christmas card. The budget for this second Spirit of Christmas was reportedly only about $750, with Parker and Stone pocketing the rest. This time, the characters were properly named: Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, and the animation style was much closer to what South Park would actually look like. The story this time was Jesus fighting Santa Claus, their battle set to music from Mortal Kombat 3, and of course, Kenny dies. He gets caught in the crossfire of the Jesus-Santa brawl, and when the dust settles, rats gather on his corpse as the other boys walk away, declaring that the true meaning of Christmas is, once again, presents. Kyle adds that Jewish kids get presents for 8 days, and the others all decide to convert. Nobody mentions Kenny. Graydon distributed the video to about 80 friends. It became one of the earliest viral videos, passed around on bootleg VHS tapes and the early internet. It caught the attention of Comedy Central, and by August 13th, 1997, the first episode of South Park aired. The show started with a budget of $300,000 for the pilot, animated entirely with actual construction paper, the only episode ever made that way. And in that pilot, Cartman gets an anal probe. Kenny McCormick died for the first time on national television. And honestly, that first death is wilder than most people remember. It's not a single death. It's a Rasputinian death. Kenny gets blasted by an alien laser and flies through the air. Stan and Kyle respond with the phrase that would become one of the most recognizable catchphrases in television history. "Oh my God, they killed Kenny! You bastards!" But then Kenny gets up. He's alive. And then a stampede of cows tramples him. And he's still alive. And then Officer Barbrady runs him over with his police cruiser. And that's finally it. Stan pokes his dead body with a stick. Kyle pulls his head off. And then the rats come. Think about that for a second. The very first Kenny death in the actual series isn't clean. It's not a single blow. It's 3 separate impacts. And Kenny keeps surviving 2 of them before the third finally does him in. Parker and Stone were already playing with the idea that Kenny's death has to be earned, has to escalate, has to be overkill. This wasn't just kid dies. It was kid refuses to die, and the universe keeps trying until it succeeds. That tension between survival and inevitability, between stubbornness and fate, is there from the very beginning. And the audience in 1997 didn't know what to make of it. Remember, this was pre-streaming, pre-social media. South Park debuted with a Nielsen rating of 1.3 for that first episode. By the 10th episode, Damien, it had climbed to 6.4. People were talking about this show everywhere, and one of the biggest things they were talking about was the kid who died every week. It was shocking in a way that's hard to explain now. In 1997, the idea of a children's character dying graphically in an animated show on a weekly basis was genuinely provocative. The Parents Television Council said the show was so offensive that it shouldn't have been made, and Kenny's death was Exhibit A in that argument. Let me put this in context. In 1997, the most popular animated shows on television were The Simpsons and King of the Hill. The Simpsons, which had been running since 1989, was a sharp satirical show, but it operated within fairly conventional narrative rules. Characters got hurt, but nobody died permanently. King of the Hill was even more restrained. It was essentially a live-action sitcom in animated form. South Park arrived in that landscape like a grenade. It wasn't just pushing the envelope, as the PTC said. It was setting the envelope on fire and dancing around the flames. And Kenny's death was the thing that made it impossible to look away. There's a precedent for the recurring death gag that most people don't know about. The Goon Show, a British radio comedy from the 1950s, featured a character called Bluebottle, voiced by Peter Sellers, who would regularly be deaded in each episode and would cry out, "You rotten swine, you've deaded me." It's been cited as a direct predecessor to Kenny's death gag, and Parker and Stone are reportedly aware of the connection. But there's a crucial difference. Bluebottle's deaths were verbal, described rather than shown. They existed in the theater of the mind. Kenny's deaths are visual, graphic, and concrete. You see the blood. You see the rats. You see the flagpole going through his body. The move from audio to visual, from suggestion to depiction, is what made Kenny's version of the gag so much more impactful. It's one thing to hear about a character dying. It's another thing entirely to watch it happen to a child made of construction paper. There's also the question of how Kenny's death compares to other recurring death tropes in media. In video games, player death is constant. You die, you respawn, you try again. But those deaths are functional, not emotional. They're obstacles, not tragedies. In horror movies, characters die as part of the genre's contract with the audience. You go to a horror film expecting people to die, but those deaths are usually one-time events for one-time characters. Kenny's death is unique because it combines the frequency of video game death with the characterization of narrative fiction. He dies as often as a video game avatar, but he's as developed as a TV character. That combination shouldn't work. It should either undermine the character's depth, because dying constantly makes a character feel disposable, or undermine the gag's impact, because developing a character makes their death feel too heavy for comedy. But South Park makes it work by alternating between the two modes. Sometimes the death is a gag, sometimes it's serious, and the audience is never entirely sure which one they're getting until it happens. That uncertainty is what gives the gag its longevity. There's also a comparison to be made with comic book characters who die and come back. Superman, Jean Grey, Captain America. But those deaths are event-driven. They happen once every few years, surrounded by hype and marketing. Kenny dies weekly. His death isn't an event. It's a condition. It's not something that happens to him. It's something that is him. Superman is a hero who sometimes dies. Kenny is a death that sometimes has a hero inside it. The difference is everything. But here's what the critics missed, and what I think Parker and Stone understood instinctively. The death of Kenny wasn't the joke. The joke was that nobody cared. The joke was the gap between the violence and the emotional response. A kid gets impaled, crushed, exploded, and his best friends in the world shout a catchphrase and then move on with their day. That's not shock humor. That's satire about shock humor. It's about the way we consume violence, the way we process it, the way we've been trained by decades of television to watch characters suffer and then immediately forget about it. Parker and Stone didn't invent that. They just turned it up to a volume where you had to notice it. So let's walk through Season 1. 13 episodes, aired from August 13th, 1997 to February 25th, 1998. Kenny dies in 12 of them. The only episode where he survives is Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, which aired December 17th, 1997. And that survival is itself a joke. Kenny spends the entire episode being assigned increasingly dangerous stagehand tasks, like plugging in a cord near a puddle of water, and miraculously doesn't die. At the end, he cheers when the end appears on screen. He's celebrating his own survival. He knows. Let me walk you through some of the standout Season 1 deaths, because even this early, there's more variety than people give the show credit for. In Volcano, the second episode, aired August 20th, 1997, Kenny gets thrown into a pit of lava by a giant volcano monster. In Weight Gain 4000, episode 3, August 27th, this is the one that really established the template. Mr. Garrison tries to shoot Kathy Lee Gifford, and the bullet ricochets, hits Kenny, and sends him flying through the air to be impaled on a flagpole. He slides down the pole, leaving a thick streak of blood behind him. That image, the flagpole, the blood streak, the body sliding down, became iconic. You could argue it's the first truly iconic Kenny death, the kind that people describe to their friends who hadn't seen the show yet. Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, episode 4, September 3rd. Kenny gets trampled at a football game. An elephant makes love to a pig, episode 5, September 10th. Stan's mutant clone throws Kenny into a microwave. Death, episode 6, September 17th, and I love the irony of the title. Kenny gets hit and killed by Death himself, while Death is actually chasing Stan's grandfather. Kenny is collateral damage to the Grim Reaper, not even Death's primary target. And then we get to Pink Eye, episode 7, October 29th, 1997, and this one is special. This is the first South Park Halloween episode, and Kenny doesn't just die once, he dies 3 times. First, the Mir space station falls from orbit and crushes him at the bus stop. Just standing there, waiting for the bus, and a space station lands on him. The quickness of it is the joke. The boys are barely into their morning routine when Kenny is just gone. Then, at the morgue, a freak accident with Worcestershire sauce brings Kenny back as a zombie. And eventually, Kyle chainsaws zombie Kenny in half. Kyle actually gets his own version of the catchphrase here. "Oh my god, I killed Kenny." Then Kenny crawls out of his grave a 3rd time, and an angel headstone falls on him, followed by a plane crashing on top of the headstone on top of Kenny. Triple kill. I've rewatched that episode probably 4 times putting this together, and the Pink Eye triple death is doing something really clever that I don't think got enough credit in 1997. It's making Kenny's death a structural motif. The episode isn't just featuring a death, it's about death. It's a Halloween episode about a zombie outbreak, and Kenny is the thread that ties the death theme together. He's the first to die, the first to come back, the cure for the outbreak, and then he dies again. He's death and resurrection personified. And nobody on screen thinks that's weird. Starvin' Marvin, episode 8, November 19th. Kenny gets pecked to death by turkeys. Damien, episode 10, February 4th, 1998. Kenny gets knocked down by Satan after the big fight between Satan and Jesus. This episode is rated an 8.1 on IMDb, And it's one of the early episodes that showed the show could do something more than just provocation. It introduced Satan as a character, set up the Jesus-Satan dynamic that would pay off hugely in the movie, and it killed Kenny almost as an afterthought. Tom's Rhinoplasty, Episode 11, February 11th. Kenny gets impaled on a flagpole again, a callback to Weight Gain 4000. That repetition is interesting to me. Parker and Stone had 12 other episodes to fill with deaths, and they went back to the flagpole. It's like they'd already found their favorite murder weapon and wanted to use it twice. Mecha Streisand, Episode 12, February 18th. Crushed by Barbra Streisand in her giant mechanical Godzilla form. She literally steps on him. And Cartman's mom is a dirty slut. The Season 1 finale, February 25th. Kenny gets crushed by falling debris during the big reveal about Cartman's parentage. Even in the episode where the show is pulling off its first major cliffhanger, Kenny's death is an afterthought. Debris falls. Kenny's under it. Move on. And honestly, I want to talk about that background quality of Kenny's Season 1 deaths, because I think it's actually important. Most of these deaths aren't the focus of the episode. They happen in the margins. A stray bullet here, a random stampede there. Kenny isn't the center of any episode's plot in Season 1. He's a recurring footnote, a margin note that reads, Kenny died here, with a little arrow. And that marginality is part of the characterization. Kenny is literally the kid who dies in the background of other people's stories. I think about my own childhood friend groups, and there was always someone who existed a little more quietly than everyone else. Not unpopular exactly, just less visible, less loud. And you'd feel terrible about it later, when you realize that person was there the whole time, and you just didn't notice them as much. Kenny is that friend. He's the one you take for granted, and the show takes him for granted too, which is both the gag and the cruelty of it. Here's the thing about Season 1's deaths. They're random. They're chaotic. They come from nowhere. A space station, a stampede of cows, turkeys, a flagpole. The universe itself seems to be conspiring against Kenny, and the randomness is the point. There's no pattern, no meaning, no karma. Kenny doesn't die because he did something wrong. He dies because the universe apparently just has it out for him. And that's actually a pretty bleak philosophical statement when you think about it. In most stories, death is a consequence. Something happens because of something else. In South Park Season 1, death is just what happens to Kenny. It's his default state. Existence is a brief interruption between one death and the next. And I think that's why the gag worked so well early on. Because we all know people, or at least we know of people, who seem to have terrible luck, who seem to attract disaster. And we laugh about it, and we feel bad about laughing, and then we laugh again. That's Kenny. That's the entire emotional cycle of the gag, compressed into 30 seconds every episode. Season 2 premiered on April 1st, 1998, and this is where things get intense. Season 2 has the most Kenny deaths of any single season. 19 total. 19. In 18 episodes. That means Kenny is averaging more than one death per episode. The show had found its audience. Ratings were through the roof. The merchandise was everywhere. And Kenny's death was the thing people talked about at school and at work. T-shirts with, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," on them were selling like crazy. Master P even released a rap song called Kenny's Dead on the Chef Aid, the South Park album. Think about that. The gag had become so culturally embedded that a rapper made a song about it. Kenny's death was no longer just a TV moment. It was a cultural phenomenon. And let me tell you, some of these Season 2 deaths are creative in ways that feel like Parker and Stone were actively competing with themselves. The season opens with Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus, which aired April 1st, an April Fool's Day prank on the audience that didn't feature the boys at all, and instead was an entire Terrence and Phillip episode. Fans were furious. They'd been waiting months to find out who Cartman's father was, and instead they got fart jokes from two Canadians. Kenny doesn't appear, but from the second episode onward, the death count starts climbing. In Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, April 22nd, we finally get the answer to the cliffhanger, and Kenny dies by being flung out of a hospital window. In Chickenpox, episode 10, aired August 26th, 1998, Kenny dies when Frida the chicken pecks him to death, but only after the episode explores the class divide between Kenny's impoverished family and the other boys' families. There's a scene where Kenny's house is so run down that the other boys are horrified, and Kenny, for a brief moment, is something other than the kid who dies. He's the kid who's poor, and then he dies anyway, because the show won't let him be anything for long. Ike's Wee Wee, Episode 4, May 20th, gives us a death that has a strange continuity glitch. After his death, Kenny briefly appears in the classroom before disappearing. These early continuity errors are kind of charming. The show was being made so fast, on such tight schedules, that sometimes dead Kenny would show up alive in a later scene because nobody caught it in the edit. It's like even the production process forgot about Kenny's death before the episode was over. Conjoined Fetus Lady, Episode 5, June 3rd. Kenny is killed during a dodgeball game. Death by dodgeball. The absurdity of that is what makes it work. It's a school sport. It's supposed to be harmless. But for Kenny, everything is lethal. A playground game becomes a death sentence. And that's what I keep coming back to with these early deaths. The mundane becomes fatal. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. The everyday world of an 8-year-old is, for Kenny, a minefield that he navigates episode after episode until it finally gets him. Every time. Summer Sucks, Episode 8 aired June 24th, 1998, is the one I mentioned before. Kenny dies in a flashback to kindergarten. A firecracker he's holding explodes and blows him to pieces. And this is the first death that really scrambles the timeline. If Kenny can die in flashbacks, then his death isn't just a present tense phenomenon. It's retroactive. He's always been dying. He was dying before we met him. The curse, or the gag, or whatever you want to call it, didn't start when the show started. It's been happening his whole life. He was dying in kindergarten. He was probably dying in preschool. He was dying in the womb, maybe. That's a horrifying thought, wrapped in a 5-second cutaway gag. Chef's Salty Chocolate Balls, Episode 9, August 19th. Killed during the Sundance Film Festival chaos, when an increasing number of independent filmmakers flood South Park, and things get out of control. Roger Ebert should lay off the fatty foods. Episode 11, July 22nd. Kenny dies in Mr. Garrison's Planetarium. Clubhouses, Episode 12, September 23rd. Killed by a falling tree while the boys build their clubhouse. Cow Days, Episode 13, September 30th. Kenny is gored to death by a bull at the rodeo, his head impaled on the bull's horn. That image, Kenny dangling from a bull's horn by his skull, is one of the most viscerally upsetting deaths in the early seasons. It's not played for absurdity the way the space station or the turkeys are. It's just brutal. A kid at a fair, a bull, a horn through the head. There's no cosmic joke there. No elaborate Rube Goldberg machine of death. Just violence. Sudden and ugly. Gnomes, Episode 17, December 16th. The Underpants Gnomes episode. Kenny dies in a coffee incident at the boys' presentation. And Prehistoric Iceman, the season finale, January 20th, 1999. Kenny dies, and the episode barely acknowledges it because it's so focused on the thought-out caveman storyline. By the end of Season 2, Kenny has died more times in one season than some characters die in their entire fictional lives. The sheer volume of death has become its own kind of numbness. And I think that numbness is intentional. Parker and Stone aren't just killing Kenny for laughs anymore. They're testing the limits of how much death an audience can absorb before it stops registering as meaningful. The answer, it turns out, is less than you'd think. Here's a fun thing I noticed while researching this video. In Season 2, the deaths start to develop a pattern in terms of timing within the episode. The early Season 1 deaths could happen almost anywhere. Beginning, middle, end. But by Season 2, the deaths have migrated predominantly to the third act. The first 2 acts set up the episode's plot. The third act resolves it. And somewhere in that resolution, Kenny dies. It's become a structural element, as reliable as a sitcom's commercial break. The show has incorporated death into its narrative architecture. And there's something else about Season 2's deaths that I want to highlight: the increasing sophistication of the audience's relationship with them. By mid-1998, South Park was a phenomenon. The ratings were massive. The merchandise was everywhere. People would tune in specifically to see how Kenny died each week. Letters to Comedy Central mentioned the deaths. Fans created lists and rankings online. This is 1998, remember? When online meant dial-up modems and GeoCities pages. The death gag had created its own community. People were bonding over Kenny's suffering, finding each other through it, making friends because they both wanted to talk about the funniest way a cartoon kid had been killed this week. There's something simultaneously heartwarming and disturbing about that. Community built on the foundation of a fictional child's weekly execution. Only South Park. I want to pause here and talk about rhythm, because I think rhythm is underappreciated in comedy analysis. In Season 2, Kenny's deaths have a rhythm. They come at roughly the same point in each episode, usually in the third act, sometimes in the second. The audience has learned the rhythm. They know when the death is coming. They can feel it approaching like a drumbeat. And this creates a weird tension where you're simultaneously enjoying the episode and waiting for the inevitable. You're watching Cartman eat cheesy poofs, and in the back of your mind you're thinking, when is Kenny going to die? That anticipation is itself a form of engagement. The show has trained you to look for death. It's made you complicit in wanting it. And that complicity, that guilt-tinged excitement, is, I think, the real joke. Not the death itself, but the fact that you wanted it. In City on the Edge of Forever, Episode 7, June 17th, which is an episode that takes place entirely inside Stan's dream, Kenny dies within the dream. He's killed by a monster in one false flashback, and killed by Fonzie's motorcycle in another. Does a dream death count? The show says yes. The universe has decided that Kenny dies everywhere, in every version of reality, in every possible timeline. And here's where I want to pause and talk about something that I think is underappreciated about the Kenny death gag, which is the rats. In the early seasons, after Kenny dies, rats would appear almost immediately and start nibbling on his corpse, carrying off body parts. This was a consistent visual coda to the death, and it's doing something really dark if you think about it. It's showing us that Kenny's body isn't just dead, it's abandoned. His friends leave, the rats come. The world doesn't just move on from Kenny's death, it actively reclaims him. The corpse isn't mourned, it's consumed. It's nature, indifferent and hungry, reducing a character we're supposed to care about to food for scavengers. That's heavy for a show about construction paper kids. The rats largely disappeared from the gag after the early seasons, which is a loss, honestly. They added something. They added a final punctuation mark to the deaths that made them feel complete. Without the rats, a Kenny death ends with Stan and Kyle's catchphrase. With the rats, it ends with nature. And nature is scarier than any catchphrase. Season 3, which aired from April 7th to January 12th, 2000, kept the gag going but started doing interesting things with it. South Park had 28 seasons by this point in the show's overall history. Wait, let me clarify. South Park currently has 28 seasons, but in 1999, they were on Season 3, and the show was hitting its stride creatively. The animation had improved. The stories were getting more ambitious. The satire was getting sharper, and the Kenny deaths were starting to feel less like a contractual obligation and more like a creative challenge. The death count was still high, over a dozen, but some episodes started playing with the formula. The Succubus, Episode 3 in Season 3, aired April 21st, 1999, is a great example. Kenny dies mysteriously while the boys are waiting for Chef to play baseball, and rats gather on his body. But then the sun rises, and Kenny is just standing there alive again. Then later, he's squashed by the succubus during Chef's wedding for real. So the show is now teasing the death, doing fake-outs, playing with audience expectations. You're watching and thinking, wait, did he die? And the show is saying, relax, we'll kill him properly, in a minute. Tweek vs. Craig, Episode 5, June 16th, 1999. Kenny gets hit by a car. Simple, effective, and oddly pedestrian compared to the space stations and alien lasers. Sexual Harassment Panda, Episode 6, July 7th, 1999. And this one is a favorite of mine. The boys visit the island of misfit mascots to find Petey the sexual harassment panda, and they run into Jimmy, the don't hold on to a large magnet while someone uses a fan nearby falcon. To demonstrate why he exists, Jimmy gives Kenny a large magnet, which immediately launches him into a massive metal fan. There's something almost Wile E. Coyote about this death. The setup is so specific, so deliberately constructed, that the inevitability of the result becomes the comedy. You see the magnet, you see the fan, you know exactly what's about to happen, and it happens anyway. And then there's Rainforest Schmainforest, Episode 1 of Season 3, April 7th, 1999, where something unprecedented happens. Kenny gets struck by lightning, and his new girlfriend Kelly revives him with CPR. He survives. He dies and comes back within the same episode through an actual in-universe mechanism that isn't just the reset button. This is the show acknowledging that Kenny's death and return cycle can function within the narrative, not just between episodes. But the most important Season 3 episode for our purposes is Spontaneous Combustion, Episode 2, April 14th, 1999. In this episode, people in South Park are spontaneously combusting because they're holding in their flatulence. Kenny, who has a new girlfriend and is trying to be polite, holds in his farts and literally bursts into flames. And I love this death because it's actually connected to character. Kenny doesn't just randomly die here. He dies because he's trying to be a better person. He's trying to be considerate. He's trying to not be disgusting in front of someone he likes. And the universe punishes him for it. If there's a crueler punchline in the history of television, I haven't found it. Be better, and you'll die for it. That's what this death says. That's the message the universe sends to Kenny McCormick. You know what's funny? If any other character in any other show spontaneously combusted because they were trying to be polite on a date, it would be the most memorable moment of the series. For Kenny, it's just another Tuesday. Season 3 also gives us the death in Sexual Harassment Panda, where Kenny gets launched into a giant metal fan by a magnet on the island of misfit mascots, and the death in Are You There, God? It's Me, Jesus, where Kenny, thinking he's gotten his period, because the boys believe getting your period is a sign of maturity, regardless of gender, explodes from what turns out to be an unrelated gastrointestinal issue. Season 3 also has Worldwide Recorder Concert, Episode 17, January 12th, 2000, where the children of the world play a brown note on their recorders and everyone defecates themselves to death. Kenny dies from this too, along with many others. He's not even special in this death. He's just one of many casualties. And there's something almost comforting about that, in a twisted way. At least he's not alone. And in Hooked on Monkey Phonics, Episode 12, November 10th, 1999, he's beaten to death by monkeys. Monkeys. Let me say that again, because I don't think it landed hard enough the first time. A child is beaten to death by monkeys. That's the kind of thing that would get a story rejected from a creative writing class. And South Park makes it work because by this point, the audience has been trained to expect the absurd. Jew by Lee, Episode 9, July 28, 1999, is another interesting one. Kenny is eaten by a mountain lion that attacks the boys during a camping trip. There's a primal quality to this death that I think is underappreciated. Most of Kenny's deaths are caused by technology, by accidents, by the machinery of modern life. But being eaten by a wild animal? That's ancient. That's pre-civilization. That's the kind of death our ancestors feared. Sitting around campfires, staring into the dark. The show is reaching into the deepest, oldest human fears for its material here, and wrapping it in construction paper. Starvin' Marvin in Space, Episode 13, November 17th, 1999. Kenny is killed during the alien adventure, continuing the show's habit of using Kenny as collateral damage in cosmic scale events. He dies in alien conflicts, the same way he dies in schoolyard accidents. Scale doesn't matter. A school bus or a spaceship, it's all the same to the Kenny death machine. The question isn't, will Kenny die? It's, how will Kenny die? The gag has shifted from shock to anticipation. We're not horrified anymore. We're waiting. And that shift, that evolution in audience relationship with the gag, is itself the satire. We've been conditioned to watch a child die and feel excited about it. Think about what that says about us. Think about what that says about how we consume media violence. The news shows us death every day, and we've developed the same relationship with it that we have with Kenny's deaths. We're briefly sad, we acknowledge it with a catchphrase or a hashtag, and then we move on to the next thing. Kenny's death gag predicted social media culture 20 years before social media existed. Season 4 aired from April 5th, 2000 to December 20th, 2000. And this is where the show started to get really smart about Kenny's deaths. But before we get into Season 4's specific kills, I want to take a detour into something that doesn't get discussed enough. The title sequence deaths and Kenny's muffled speech. Because Kenny doesn't just die in the episodes, he dies in the opening credits too. And those title sequence deaths tell their own story. Starting in Season 7, after Kenny returned from his permanent death, the title sequence was changed. For Seasons 7 through 11, Kenny is killed in the credits by Death himself. The hooded skeleton figure touches Kenny, and he drops dead. This happens every single episode. So for 5 straight seasons, Kenny dies before the episode even starts. Think about what that does to the viewer psychologically. You haven't even gotten to the story yet, and already Kenny is dead. It normalizes the death even further. It makes it part of the furniture, part of the wallpaper. The episode hasn't begun, and Kenny is already gone. Some tallies of Kenny's total deaths include these title sequence deaths, which would add another 71 instances to the total. Others don't, because they're not part of the narrative. It's a legitimate question about what counts as a death. Is a title sequence death a real death? Does it have narrative weight? Or is it more like a logo, a brand identity? I'd argue it's the latter, but even the branding says something important. This show is about death, specifically this character's death, and we want you to know that before the story begins. And while we're on the subject of things that happen outside the episodes, let me talk about what Kenny says during the title sequence. Most people know that Kenny's dialogue is muffled. His parka covers his mouth and everything he says sounds like garbled mumbling. But during the opening credits, Kenny actually says recognizable things if you listen carefully enough. In Seasons 1 through 3, he reportedly says things about his preferences regarding girls. I'll leave the specifics to your imagination, but it's classic Kenny. Even in the credits, he's being inappropriate in a way that only people who listen very carefully can hear. That muffled voice, by the way, is provided by Matt Stone, who essentially speaks Kenny's lines while holding his hand or a piece of fabric over his mouth. In the movie, when Kenny's face is finally revealed and he speaks clearly, his voice was provided by Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead. And in later episodes where Kenny is unhooded, his voice was done by Eric Stowe, the show's animation director. So Kenny has had at least 3 different voices, depending on whether he's hooded or not. The muffled version is the one we all know, and it's become one of the most recognizable character voices in animation, which is ironic, because the whole point is that you can't understand it. The muffled voice connects to the death gag in a way that I don't think is accidental. Kenny can't be heard, Kenny can't be understood, and Kenny can't be remembered when he dies. He's invisible in 3 different ways: vocally, physically, and existentially. The parka doesn't just muffle his words, it hides his face. We don't even know what Kenny looks like for most of the series. He's a hood and a pair of eyes. An identity so suppressed that he's barely a person at all. And that's the kid who dies every week. The kid nobody can hear, nobody can see, and nobody can remember. If the writers had deliberately designed a metaphor for the invisibility of the marginalized poor, they couldn't have done better than Kenny McCormick. And the crazy thing is, I don't think that's what they were going for. I think they just thought it was funny. But art often means more than its creators intend. There's also something worth saying about the parka itself. Multiple episodes have suggested that the parka plays a role in Kenny's deaths. In Fat Camp, Season 4, Episode 15, December 6th, 2000, Kenny isn't actually killed. Instead, a boy dressed up as Kenny, wearing a similar parka, dies. Stan still says the catchphrase, but adds, "sort of." And Kyle responds with, "Yeah, they kinda killed Kenny. Sort of. Look-alike. You bastards." In The Biggest Douche in the Universe, Season 6, Rob Schneider is killed while wearing Kenny's outfit. And in Cripple Fight, Season 5, Timmy tries to have Jimmy killed by giving him a parka that resembles Kenny's. Jimmy walks down a street, narrowly escaping death with every step, and Jimbo can be heard saying, "There's Kenny! Kill him!" The implication is that the parka might be cursed, that anyone who wears it attracts death. The orange hood isn't just clothing, it's a target. This opens up philosophical questions about the nature of Kenny's deaths. Is it Kenny who's cursed, or the parka? The show never resolves these contradictions, and I think that's fine. I think the contradictions are the point. Kenny's death is a mythological phenomenon that resists logical explanation, just like death in the real world. We have 100 different frameworks for understanding death: religious, scientific, philosophical, and none of them are fully satisfying. Kenny's death gag is the same way. It has a dozen different explanations, and all of them are true, and none of them are complete. Okay, back to Season 4 specifically. 2 episodes in particular deserve attention. But first, let me talk about the Season 4 deaths more broadly, because this season has some of the best ones. In The Tooth Fairy Tiff, Episode 2, April 5th, 2000, Kenny is killed during the Tooth Fairy scheme, a mundane setup that becomes lethal through the show's reliable escalation. In Quintuplets 2000, Episode 3, April 26th, Kenny suffocates. Timmy 2000, Episode 4, April 19th, Kenny dies during the Phil Collins concert. Pip, Episode 5, November 29th. Kenny doesn't appear because it's a standalone adaptation of Great Expectations, but his absence is itself noteworthy. Fourth Grade, Episode 12, November 8th, 2000, has one of those strange continuity moments where Kenny dies earlier in the episode, but then shows up in the classroom at the end, alive. The show hadn't yet decided how strict to be about the death per episode rule within the episode itself. These are growing pains. The mythology hadn't solidified yet. Do the handicapped go to hell? And, probably, the 4th and 5th episodes of Season 4 form a two-parter that gives us one of the strangest Kenny survival moments. Kenny is run over by a bus in Part 1 and presumed dead. But in Part 2, when the bus stops in Mexico, he's scraped off the underside of the bus by a Mexican man and found to still be alive. He survived being run over by a bus, by being stuck underneath it for an entire episode. This is, as far as I can tell, the only time in the show's history where a character who is presumed dead from one of the standard violent Kenny deaths is later revealed to have survived it. It breaks the formula. It says, sometimes death doesn't take. Sometimes the kid under the bus is still breathing. And there's something almost hopeful about that, buried inside one of the darkest running gags in television. Cherokee Hair Tampons, Episode 6, June 28th, 2000, gives us the scene I mentioned earlier where Kenny gets frustrated about nobody caring about his deaths. But it also gives us a Kenny death that happens in the margins of Kyle's medical storyline. Kyle is the one who's supposedly dying, and the whole episode is about whether Kyle will survive. And Kenny, who has died almost 60 times at this point, is supposed to just sit there and watch his friend get all the attention for the mere possibility of death. The irony is staggering. Kyle might die once, and the whole town is in crisis. Kenny has died dozens of times, and nobody remembers. That double standard, between the deaths that matter and the deaths that don't, is the dark heart of the Kenny gag. Some people's deaths are tragedies. Other people's deaths are punchlines. And which category you fall into has nothing to do with the dying and everything to do with who's watching. First, Cartman joins Nambla. The 6th episode aired June 21st, 2000. This episode is crucial because it provides the first in-universe explanation for Kenny's death and return cycle. Throughout the episode, Kenny is trying to get his parents to stop having children. His mom keeps getting pregnant, and Kenny is tired of it. By the end of the episode, Kenny dies, and we see his parents' reaction. His mom gives birth to a new baby, who looks exactly like Kenny, complete with the orange parka. The parents name the baby Kenny, and comment that this is either the 50th or 52nd time this has happened. The joke is that they've lost count of their own child's deaths and rebirths. And I need you to think about what just happened here for a second. For 53 episodes, Kenny has been dying and coming back with no explanation. It's been treated as a pure gag. And now, suddenly, the show is saying, No. This has been happening within the story the whole time. Kenny's parents know. They've been through this dozens of times. They've watched their son die and be reborn over and over again. And they've just kept going. They kept naming him Kenny. They kept putting him in the orange parka. This isn't a gag anymore. This is tragedy. This is parents who have experienced the worst thing a parent can experience, the death of a child, more than 50 times, and have become so numb to it that they've lost count. Now, Parker and Stone almost certainly didn't think of it this way at the time. This was a joke. It was meant to be funny, and it is funny. But the lore they established here, that Kenny's death cycle is a real, recurring event that his family is aware of, would eventually become one of the most interesting mythological threads in the entire series. They planted a seed here that wouldn't fully bloom for another 10 years. The other crucial Season 4 death is in Cartman's Silly Hate Crime 2000, Episode 2, April 12th, 2000. In this episode, Kenny is crushed by bricks while sledding. It's not particularly creative as a death, but what makes it important is that Stan and Kyle accidentally cause it. They kill Kenny. And Stan's reaction is this wonderfully nonchalant. Oh my god, we killed Kenny. Not they. We. And Kyle, equally calm. We bastards. The show is now comfortable enough with the gag to let the main characters be the killers, and to let them acknowledge it with a shrug instead of horror. That evolution, from genuine shock to casual self-awareness, mirrors how the audience itself has evolved in its relationship with the gag. I want to take a tangent here, because something has been building in my head throughout this analysis, and I need to get it out. There's a reason the "oh my god, they killed Kenny" / "you bastards" call and response became one of the most quoted phrases of the late 90s. It's because it gave the audience a script for processing death. Not real death, not yet, but the idea of death. We live in a world where we're constantly confronted with reports of people dying. On the news, in our feeds, everywhere. And we don't have a socially acceptable way to react to most of it. We can't break down crying every time someone we don't know dies. We can't be indifferent without feeling guilty. So what do? We develop a routine, a ritual, a catchphrase. We say something performative, thoughts and prayers, for instance, and then we move on. Stan's "oh my god, they killed Kenny" is the most honest depiction of that process I've ever seen. It's genuine shock condensed into a formula. It's grief turned into habit. And Kyle's "you bastards" is the anger that follows grief, also turned into habit. The whole catchphrase is a miniature model of how humans process death in a media-saturated world. And we didn't need a sociology textbook to teach us that. We just needed a cartoon. Parker and Stone have said in interviews that the "you bastards" line isn't actually directed at whoever kills Kenny within the episode. It's directed at themselves, at the writers, for writing the death into the script. That meta-awareness has always been part of the gag. Kyle isn't yelling at a space station or a pack of turkeys. He's yelling at Trey Parker and Matt Stone for deciding once again to kill their friend. It's a protest against the inevitability of narrative convention, and it never works. Kenny dies anyway, every time. Cartman Land, Episode 6 of Season 5, aired July 25th, 2001, gives us another layer. Cartman inherits $1 million and buys an amusement park, and the McCormick family sues him for Kenny's wrongful death on one of the rides. When Cartman protests, he says something that cuts right through the fourth wall. Kenny, he dies all the time. This is a character within the show acknowledging what the audience has known for 5 seasons. And the fact that it's Cartman who says it, Cartman, who has the least empathy of any character on the show, makes it land harder. Nobody else seems to remember Kenny's deaths, but Cartman does. And he uses that knowledge not to mourn, not to question, but to avoid a lawsuit. And then there's Cherokee Hair Tampons, Episode 7 of Season 4, June 28th, 2000. Kyle is desperately ill, and Stan keeps telling Kenny how worried he is that Kyle might die. Kenny, understandably, gets increasingly irritated, because here's Stan, losing his mind over the possibility of one friend dying, while he's completely ignored the fact that another friend, Kenny, has died dozens of times. Kenny's frustration boils over, and he storms off, yelling his own muffled version of Cartman's catchphrase. And honestly, this scene makes me angry, and I think it's supposed to, because Kenny is right. He's absolutely right. He's been dying over and over, and nobody has ever cared the way Stan cares about Kyle. The double standard isn't a gag here, it's a wound. It's a character who knows he's disposable, who knows his suffering doesn't count, and who's finally saying something about it. And nobody listens, because they never do. Remember what I said earlier about the gag being about the gap between violence and emotional response? This scene in Cherokee Hair Tampons is the show looking at that gap directly and saying, yeah, this is messed up. We know. Kenny knows too. And nobody's going to do anything about it. Season 5, which aired from June 20th to December 12th, 2001, is the season that changed everything. Not just for Kenny, but for the show's entire relationship with death. And it all comes down to one episode. Kenny dies. Episode 13, Season 5 finale, December 5th, 2001. But before we get there, let me talk about some of the Season 5 deaths that came before, because they're important context. Season 5 is actually a fascinating season for Kenny, because you can feel the show wrestling with the gag. Some episodes kill Kenny in creative, interesting ways. Others feel almost obligatory, like the writers are going through the motions. And then there are episodes that start experimenting with not killing him at all, as if the show is testing whether it can survive without the gag. In It Hits the Fan, Episode 1, June 20th, 2001, everyone in South Park starts saying the S word after it's used uncensored on a TV show, and a plague breaks out. Kenny dies from the plague, which is fitting because in an episode about the normalization of offensive content, Kenny's death, the original offensive content of South Park, is just another casualty. In Scott Tenorman Must Die, Episode 4, July 11th, 2001, widely considered one of the best South Park episodes ever made, with a 9.7 on IMDb. Kenny dies in such a forgettable way that I genuinely had to look it up. He's crushed. That's it. In an episode where Cartman feeds a kid his own parents' chili, Kenny's death barely registers. The show has found something more shocking than killing Kenny, and that's a seismic shift. In Cripple Fight, Episode 2, June 27th, 2001, Kenny is carried off by a giant eagle at the end of the episode. He's literally plucked from the ground and taken into the sky, kicking and screaming by a bird of prey. There's something almost mythological about this death, like Ganymede being taken by Zeus's eagle, except instead of being brought to Olympus to be a cupbearer, Kenny is brought somewhere to die, again. Super Best Friends, Episode 3, July 4th, 2001. Kenny drowns after being knocked into the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. Towley, Episode 8, August 8th, 2001. Kenny dies in a military facility. Here Comes the Neighborhood, Episode 12, November 28th. Kenny dies, but the show doesn't even bother showing us how. He's just dead at the end, and the episode moves on. That casual approach, not even bothering to show the death, tells you that even Parker and Stone were getting bored with the gag. They've admitted as much. Matt Stone said, and I'm paraphrasing, that they got sick of trying to come up with new ways to kill him. The creative well was running dry. And here's the thing about creative wells running dry. Sometimes, that's when the most interesting things happen. Because when you can't do the easy version of something anymore, you have to dig deeper. You have to find out what the gag was actually about underneath all the spectacle. And Kenny dies is what you find when you dig. But I want to point out one more thing before we get to Kenny dies. Look at the Season 5 deaths I just listed. An eagle, a plague, drowning, being crushed off screen. These deaths are increasingly perfunctory. The show isn't putting the same creative energy into killing Kenny that it did in Seasons 1 and 2. And that creative decline is itself thematically meaningful, because what it tells the audience, subconsciously, is this is getting old. This is running out of steam. Something has to change. And that's exactly the feeling you need to have before Kenny dies can hit you the way it does. If the deaths had been consistently creative and spectacular right up until the finale, the shift to a serious death would feel jarring. But because the gag had been winding down, because you could feel the show's discomfort with it. The shift to sincerity feels earned. It feels like the natural conclusion of a process that's been happening all season. The show wasn't just killing Kenny in season 5, it was killing the gag. And Kenny Dies was the funeral. Kenny Dies aired on December 5th, 2001, the 13th episode of season 5, the 78th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker, and from the very first scene, something is different. There's a weight to this episode, a gravity. Kenny isn't crushed by a space station or eaten by turkeys. He's diagnosed with a terminal muscular disease. He's hospitalized. His friends have to visit him. His parents are devastated. For the first time in 5 seasons, Kenny's death is treated not as a punchline, but as a tragedy. On the DVD commentary, Parker and Stone said they'd originally planned to kill off Kyle for a year, but decided to kill Kenny instead, since they were already running out of ways to kill him. That's a fascinating bit of production context, because it means Kenny's permanent death wasn't born out of narrative ambition. It was born out of creative fatigue with a gag that had run its course. But the episode they made is anything but fatigued. The Cartman subplot is classic South Park. He comes across a truckload of aborted fetuses and tries to sell them for profit, eventually using Kenny's illness to lobby Congress for stem cell research. There's a scene where Cartman leads the House of Representatives in a sing-along of Asia's Heat of the Moment that is simultaneously one of the most absurd and one of the most pointed political satires the show has ever done. But the emotional core of the episode belongs to Stan. Stan can't deal with it. He can't face Kenny in the hospital. He avoids visiting. He makes excuses. And when he finally works up the courage to go, Kenny's bed is empty. Kyle tells him Kenny has passed. And Stan asks what Kenny's last words were. And Kyle says Kenny's last words were, "Where's Stan?" If you've made it this far into this video, you already know this isn't a light topic. And that moment, "Where's Stan?" is the moment that punched me in the gut harder than any of the 100+ deaths that came before it. Because it recontextualizes everything. For 5 seasons, Kenny has been the disposable friend, the one who dies and nobody cares. And in his final moments, his genuine, treated as real, permanent final moments, his last thought was about the friend who wasn't there. Not anger, not resentment, not, "Why doesn't anyone remember my deaths?" Just, "Where's Stan?" That tells you who Kenny McCormick actually is underneath the orange parka. He's the kid who loves his friends, even though they forget he exists every time he dies. He's the one who keeps showing up, even though he knows the universe is going to kill him again. And when he finally gets a death that matters, a death that people actually grieve, his concern is for someone else. That's not a joke character. That's the most quietly heroic figure in the entire show. The episode rates an 8.8 on IMDb, one of the highest rated episodes in the entire series. And for once, the number feels right. I want to talk about something that happened to me when I was rewatching Kenny Dies for this video. I'd seen it before, obviously, multiple times. I knew what was coming. I knew about the "Where's Stan" moment. I knew about Cartman's scheme with the fetuses. I knew all of it, and it still got me. The scene where Stan can't walk through the hospital door, can't make himself go inside to see his friend, that scene hit me exactly as hard on the 5th viewing as it did on the 1st. And I think I know why. It's because I've been Stan. Not in the dying friend sense, thank God, but in the I know I should be there for someone and I can't make myself do it sense. The fear of confronting something real and painful and irreversible. The cowardice of avoidance. Stan doesn't stay away from the hospital because he doesn't care about Kenny. He stays away because he cares too much. Because seeing Kenny in that bed would make it real. And as long as it's not real, there's still hope. That's not a South Park emotion. That's a human emotion. And the fact that it's embedded in an episode of an animated comedy, surrounded by fetus jokes and Cartman scheming, makes it hit harder, not softer. Because in real life, terrible things happen alongside mundane things. People receive devastating diagnoses and then go home and watch TV. People cry and then eat dinner. Life doesn't pause for tragedy. South Park knows this. Kenny Dies knows this. The episode lets the comedy and the tragedy coexist in the same 22 minutes, because that's how they coexist in life. There's also something worth saying about Chef's speech to Stan about death in this episode. Stan asks why God would let Kenny die, and Chef gives this wonderfully bleak answer about how God takes the people closest to us because it makes him feel better about himself. He says God is a vengeful God who's still pissed off about something we did thousands of years ago, and he just doesn't care who he takes. Children, puppies, it doesn't matter, as long as it makes us sad. That speech is, on the surface, a joke. It's Chef being Chef, dispensing wisdom that's simultaneously profound and absurd. But underneath the joke, there's a real theological question. Why does suffering exist? Why do innocent people die? And Chef's answer, that God is petty and vindictive, is actually closer to how a lot of people feel about the universe than they'd care to admit. We want to believe there's a plan. We want to believe death serves a purpose. But sometimes a kid gets crushed by a space station for no reason, and the most honest response is, God's just a jerk sometimes. Isaac Hayes, who voiced Chef, brought something to that speech that a lesser actor couldn't have. There's a warmth to Chef's nihilism, a gentleness. He's not saying the universe is cruel with anger. He's saying it with acceptance, with compassion. He's telling Stan, this is how it is, and I'm sorry, and I'll be here while you process it. That's what adults do for children in the face of death. They don't explain it. They can't. They just sit there and say, I know. I'm sorry. It's awful. I'm here. I want to linger on this episode for another minute because there's a production detail that I think matters. Kenny Dies was the last episode to use the 4th grade title sequence, which had been introduced at the start of season 4 when the boys moved up a grade. On the DVD commentary, Parker and Stone are unusually candid about their creative process. They talk about originally planning to kill Kyle for a year. Imagine that. Kyle dead for a whole season, but deciding on Kenny because the death gag was getting stale. And I think that honesty is important because it tells you something about how these decisions get made in television. The most emotionally devastating episode of the series, the one that made people cry about a character who died 100 times, was born from exhaustion, from boredom, from writers who couldn't think of another funny way to crush a kid with a piano. Sometimes the best art comes from the worst reasons. Sometimes you do your most honest work when you've run out of tricks and all that's left is sincerity. Kenny Dies is sincere in a way that almost nothing else in South Park is. The show usually hides behind irony. It usually keeps emotion at arm's length with a joke. But in Kenny Dies, when Stan can't face his dying friend, when Kyle tells him about Kenny's last words, the show isn't joking. It's just being sad. And that sadness, coming from a show that had spent 5 years treating this character's death as a punchline, hits with the force of everything that came before it. Every laugh we had at Kenny's expense becomes a debt that the show is now calling in, and the bill is enormous. The other thing I want to mention about this episode is the timing. Kenny Dies aired on December 5th, 2001. That's less than 3 months after September 11th. The country was in mourning. The idea of sudden, unexpected death, of people being alive one moment and gone the next, of survivors unable to process their grief, was not abstract. It was visceral. It was everywhere. And into that moment, South Park released an episode about a kid dying slowly of a disease, while his best friend couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. I'm not saying Parker and Stone made the episode in response to 9/11. The season had been planned well before the attacks. But the cultural context gave the episode a weight it might not have had in a different year. Death was in the air that December, and Kenny's death breathed it in. Kenny stayed dead for almost all of season 6, which aired from March 6th to December 11th, 2002. For the first time, the boys were a trio instead of a quartet. Butterscotch stepped in as the 4th friend for much of the season, and Tweak Tweak took a turn too. Both characters got significantly more development as a result of Kenny's absence, which ended up being one of the most creatively productive decisions Parker and Stone ever made. Matt Stone said that only a small minority of fans were significantly angered enough by Kenny's absence to threaten a boycott of Comedy Central. But the absence was felt. During season 6, Kenny wasn't entirely gone. His soul was trapped inside Cartman's body after Cartman accidentally drank his ashes, thinking they were chocolate milk mix. This led to a whole subplot in A Ladder to Heaven, and the biggest douche in the universe, where Kenny's soul gets exorcised into a pot roast, which is then eaten by Rob Schneider. And when Rob Schneider gets impaled on a flagpole in a movie trailer within the episode, a callback to one of Kenny's Season 1 deaths, it counts as a Kenny death by proxy. The show was finding ways to kill Kenny without Kenny even having a body. The gag had become so ingrained in the show's DNA that it persisted even in the character's absence. Kenny finally returned in Red Sleigh Down, the Season 6 finale, December 11th, 2002. He just shows up at the end, and when the boys ask where he's been, he says he's been over there, pointing off screen. That's it. No explanation. No grand resurrection. Just, I was over there. This is perhaps the most South Park thing about the entire Kenny death mythology. The resolution to his permanent death is a shoulder shrug. And you know what? I think that's exactly right. Because what would a real explanation look like? How do you explain a kid who dies and comes back to life in a universe that runs on dark comedy? You don't. You just point off screen and move on. The beauty of Kenny's return is that it refuses to take itself seriously. After an entire season of absence, after a genuinely emotional death episode, after all that grief and all that weight, Kenny comes back with a throwaway line and a wave. It's the show telling you, don't get too attached to the drama. We're still a comedy, but we wanted you to feel something for a minute there. Hope it was okay. There's a real-world parallel here that I think about sometimes. When someone you love is gone for a long time, gone on a trip, or just absent from your life, and they come back, the reunion is rarely as dramatic as you imagined it would be. You don't fall into their arms weeping. You just say, "Oh hey, where have you been?" And they say, "Over there." And that's life. That's how people are. Kenny's return is one of the most realistic things in a deeply unrealistic show. And from this point forward, everything changed. Kenny came back, but his deaths became significantly less frequent. In Season 7, he died only once. Season 8, once. Season 9, 3 times. Season 10, once. Season 11, once. After dying in almost every episode for 5 years, Kenny was now barely dying at all. The gag had evolved from a structural requirement into an occasional surprise. And honestly, the deaths hit harder when they're rare. When Kenny dies once a season, it actually means something. When he died every week, it was wallpaper. Beautiful, creative, horrifying wallpaper. But wallpaper. When it happens once, you notice the wall. There's a technical aspect to this transition that I think is worth mentioning. During the first 5 seasons, the writing staff had to build a Kenny death into every script. It was a box that needed to be checked, and that obligation constrained the writing in ways that weren't always productive. Sometimes the death felt forced, shoehorned in, like the writers were fulfilling a contractual obligation rather than telling a story. After Season 6, the death became optional. And when something becomes optional, it only happens when there's a good reason for it. The post-return Kenny deaths aren't obligations. They're choices. Each one is deliberate. Each one is there because the writers decided that this episode, this story, this moment would be enhanced by Kenny dying. That selectivity is why the post-Season 6 deaths are, on average, better than the pre-Season 6 deaths. They're made with intention rather than inertia. I also want to point out something about the pace of the show's production that affects the death gag. South Park episodes are famously made in about 6 days. Parker and Stone write, record, animate, and deliver an episode in less than a week. In the early seasons, that meant the Kenny death was often one of the first things decided. How does Kenny die this week? Was a question that had to be answered early. In the later seasons, when the death became optional, it was more likely to emerge organically from the story. That's a subtle shift, but it matters. It means the early deaths are premises, and the later deaths are conclusions. The early deaths ask, what's funny? The later deaths ask, what does this mean? And you know what? Looking at it that way, the entire arc of Kenny's deaths mirrors the arc of the show itself. South Park started as a show that asked, what's funny? And evolved into a show that asks, what does this mean? Kenny's deaths tracked that evolution perfectly. He went from dying because it was funny to dying because it meant something. And both versions are valid. Both versions are South Park, but the second version is the one that wins Emmys and makes people cry and ends up in philosophy textbooks. The first version is the one that got people watching. You need both. You need the flagpole to get to Where's Stan? Let's talk about the deaths that happened after the return, because some of them are genuinely among the best the show ever produced. Best Friends Forever, Season 9, Episode 4, March 30th, 2005. This is the Kenny episode, the one that defines what Kenny's death can be when the show is operating at its absolute peak. Kenny is the first person in South Park to get a PlayStation Portable. He becomes obsessed with a game called Heaven vs. Hell and reaches level 60, the highest possible. He steps outside and gets run over by an ice cream truck, driven by a guy who's playing the same game and just reached level 4. Kenny goes to heaven, and this is where the episode becomes something special. It turns out God created the PSP as a talent search. Whoever could master the game would command heaven's armies in the final battle against Satan. Kenny is their Keanu Reeves. He's the chosen one. But just as the battle is about to begin, doctors on Earth revive Kenny, leaving him in a persistent vegetative state. What follows is a devastating, wickedly funny satire of the Terry Schiavo case, which was dominating the news at the time. Cartman, who inherited Kenny's PSP in his will, campaigns to have Kenny's feeding tube removed, not because he cares about Kenny's wishes, but because he can't access the PSP until Kenny is officially dead. Stan and Kyle campaign to keep Kenny alive, not because they know what Kenny would want, but because they can't bear to lose him again. Both sides go to the media. Both sides make it about themselves. And the whole time, Heaven is desperately waiting for Kenny to die so he can save the universe. The episode aired on March 30th, 2005. Terry Schiavo died the very next day, March 31st. Parker and Stone had been working on the episode for about a week. They said the Schiavo case had become the biggest news story since September 11th, and they had the structure figured out in about 30 minutes. The turnaround time on a South Park episode in those days was 6 days, which meant they were making social commentary essentially in real time. The ending is perfect. The last page of Kenny's will is found, and his stated wish in the event of being in a vegetative state is, "Please, for the love of God, don't ever show me in that condition on national television." The implied lesson, stated more directly by Kyle, is that both sides were wrong. Cartman was right for the wrong reasons. Kenny should have been allowed to die, but Cartman only wanted it for the PSP. Stan and Kyle were wrong for the right reasons. They wanted to keep Kenny alive out of genuine love, but they turned a private tragedy into a public spectacle to do it. Kenny dies, returns to heaven, commands the angels to victory with a golden PSP, and receives a golden Keanu Reeves statue as a reward. That statue appears in his room in later episodes. This episode won South Park its first Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. First time. After being nominated 4 times before and losing to The Simpsons and others, this is the episode that did it. A Kenny death episode. The one where his death isn't a punchline. It's the engine that drives a searing piece of political commentary. And it won an Emmy. Think about the journey from a construction paper kid being crushed by a space station to an Emmy-winning meditation on the right to die. That's what Kenny's deaths became. And I want to put that Emmy in context, because context matters. South Park had been nominated 4 times before this, and lost every single time. They lost to shows like The Simpsons, which had won the award multiple times. For a show that was consistently described as crude, juvenile, and offensive to win its first Emmy, with a story about a child in a vegetative state being used as a political football. That's validation of the highest order. It's the television industry saying, yes, this show does important work. Yes, this character matters. Yes, a kid who dies every week can be the vehicle for some of the sharpest commentary on television. I think Parker and Stone were probably surprised. I'm not sure the show has ever won a more deserved award. And here's something I want to spend a minute on, because I think it's easy to forget in the rush of episode analysis. The catchphrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," / "you bastards," deserves its own examination, because it's not just words. It's a ritual. It's a liturgy. And like all liturgies, it evolved over time. In the earliest episodes, Kyle said the entire thing himself, both lines. It was one kid reacting. Then, fairly quickly, the catchphrase was split between Stan and Kyle. Stan gets the shock, Kyle gets the anger. That division of emotional labor is significant. Stan represents grief, Kyle represents rage. Together, they form the two most common human reactions to sudden death. First you're stunned, then you're furious. The catchphrase captures the entire emotional arc of bereavement in 2 lines. As the seasons progressed, variations appeared. In Cartman's Silly Hate Crime 2000, when Stan and Kyle accidentally kill Kenny themselves, Stan says, "Oh my God, we killed Kenny," and Kyle says, "We bastards." The grammar shifts, the pronoun changes, and suddenly, the ritual has room for self-awareness. The mourners become the killers. The grief becomes guilt. In Pink Eye, when Kyle himself kills zombie Kenny with a chainsaw, he says, "Oh my God, I killed Kenny! You bastard!" pointing at himself. The accusation loops back. The bastard is the speaker. That kind of recursive self-blame is actually a very common feature of real grief. Survivors often blame themselves for deaths they couldn't have prevented. Kenny's catchphrase, in its variations, accidentally maps the psychology of survivors' guilt. By the later seasons, the catchphrase became rare enough that when it did appear, it carried the weight of history. Hearing, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," in Season 21 hits differently than hearing it in Season 1. In Season 1, it was a punchline. In Season 21, it's a callback. It's a reminder. It's the show acknowledging its own history and inviting the audience to feel the accumulated weight of decades of death. The words haven't changed, but the context has. And context is everything. There's a wonderful irony in the fact that the catchphrase, "They killed Kenny," uses the passive construction. They killed him. Not a specific agent, not a named killer. They. This anonymous, collective, unidentified they is responsible for Kenny's death, and nobody ever asks who they are. It's the same way we talk about systemic problems. They cut the funding. They closed the factory. They let the infrastructure collapse. The they is never identified because identifying them would require accountability. And accountability is something the world of South Park, like the real world, is allergic to. Kenny's death is always someone's fault, and it's always no one's fault. That's the they. That's the catchphrase. That's the gag that launched 1 billion t-shirts. The thing about Best Friends Forever that I keep coming back to is how it uses Kenny's death history as an asset rather than a liability. In most shows, having a character who dies and comes back would undermine any attempt at a serious death story. The audience would think, so what? He'll be back. But Best Friends Forever weaponizes that expectation. It knows you know Kenny always comes back, and it uses that knowledge to sharpen the satire. Because the debate in the episode isn't really about whether Kenny will live or die. It's about who gets to decide, and why, and what their real motivations are. The Schiavo debate wasn't really about Terry Schiavo. It was about politics, about media, about self-righteousness. And Kenny's death isn't really about Kenny. It's about everyone around him, performing their grief or their mercy for an audience. And that Keanu Reeves statue that Kenny wins in heaven, it shows up in his room in later episodes. It's just there, on a shelf or a nightstand, visible in the background. A golden trophy from God for saving the universe. And nobody in South Park knows what it is. Nobody asks about it. It's the ultimate Kenny detail. An incredible achievement that goes completely unnoticed by everyone around him. I need to take a breath here, because this is a good spot to reflect on something. We've been going for a while now, and if you're still listening, thank you. Seriously, this is a long one, and I know it's a lot, but I think it's worth sitting with these moments because they show you something about what a running gag can become over time. Kenny's death started as shock value. Then it became expectation. Then it became boredom. Then it became absence. Then it became rarity. And in its rarity, it became weight. The same gag, transformed entirely by context and frequency. That's not just good comedy writing. That's an accidental masterclass in how audience relationship with repeated tropes evolves. Let me go through some of the post-Season 6 deaths individually, because each one does something different. It's Christmas in Canada. Season 7, Episode 15, December 17th, 2003. Kenny's lucky streak of not dying throughout Season 7 ends here. He dies during the Christmas adventure. This was the first post-return death, and it landed differently because we'd had an entire season of Kenny being safe. We'd gotten used to him surviving. And then, boom. The relief of his return was punctuated by the reminder that this is still Kenny's fate. The Jeffersons, Season 8, Episode 6, April 14th, 2004. Kenny is disguised as Michael Jackson's son Blanket, and Mr. Jefferson, who is clearly Michael Jackson, picks him up and throws him through the ceiling, killing him. This death is disturbing in a way most Kenny deaths aren't, because it's essentially a depiction of an adult accidentally killing a child through reckless behavior. The Michael Jackson parallels make it uncomfortable in a way that a space station or a turkey attack never could. Kenny dies here not because of random cosmic cruelty, but because a specific adult failed to understand the consequences of his actions. That's a different kind of death. That's negligence. Best Friends Forever, we already covered. Wing, Season 9, Episode 3, March 23rd, 2005. Kenny dies in a fairly standard manner, but Best Friends Forever overshadows everything around it. Season 9 has 3 Kenny deaths total, and the third is in 2 days before the day after tomorrow. Episode 8, October 19th, 2005, where Kenny drowns in the flood that the boys accidentally caused at Beaver Dam. Season 10, One Death. And this is where I want to talk about something that's easy to miss if you're just counting deaths. The episodes where Kenny almost dies but doesn't. Because in the later seasons, there are episodes where the show sets up situations that would have killed Kenny in the early days. Dangerous scenarios, risky adventures, near misses, and then doesn't follow through. Those non-deaths are just as important as the deaths, because they're the show playing with our expectations. Every time Kenny survives, we exhale. We think, okay, maybe this episode. And then it doesn't happen. And the tension builds and builds. And when the death finally does come, it's explosive because of all the episodes where it didn't. This is something that only works because of the history. A new character can't have the tension of a near miss because there's no established pattern to deviate from. But Kenny has 100 deaths behind him, so every moment he's alive in the later seasons carries the weight of that history. He's a character walking through a minefield that he's already stepped on 100 times. Every step that doesn't explode is a miracle. Season 11, One Death, and it's a great one. The List, Season 11, Episode 14, November 14th, 2007. BB fires a gun from miles away, and the bullet travels all the way to the McCormick house, through the kitchen window, and through Kenny's head. Of all the places that bullet could have gone in the entire town of South Park, it found Kenny. That's the universe I was talking about earlier. The one that seems to have a personal vendetta against this kid. A bullet from across town, through a window, into his skull. The probability of that is essentially 0. But for Kenny, it's just Wednesday. I want to linger on The List, death, because it's such a perfect encapsulation of post-return Kenny deaths. It's random. It's sudden. It comes from nowhere. Nobody on screen is trying to kill Kenny. BB doesn't even know where the bullet went. It's pure cosmic coincidence. And in that randomness, it connects back to the very earliest Kenny deaths. The ones from Season 1, where a space station would just fall out of the sky. The show has come full circle. After years of increasingly complex, psychologically rich, narratively meaningful deaths, it throws in a random stray bullet and says, sometimes death is just a stray bullet. Sometimes there's no meaning. Sometimes the universe is just having a bad day, and you're in its path. That's terrifying and comforting at the same time. Terrifying because it can happen to anyone. Comforting because it means Kenny's suffering isn't personal. He's not being punished. He's just unlucky. Infinitely, cosmically, impossibly unlucky. Season 12, and this is remarkable. Kenny doesn't die at all. Not once. In the entire season. 0 deaths. After 100+ deaths across the franchise, there's an entire season where Kenny survives everything. I don't know if this was a conscious decision by Parker and Stone, or if it just worked out that way, but it's notable. Season 12 aired from March 12th to November 19th, 2008, and it included heavy hitters like Britney's New Look, Major Boobage, Breast Cancer Show Ever, and The Ungroundable. These are some of the strongest episodes of the later era show, and Kenny lives through all of them. He's present, he's part of the group, and he doesn't die. For viewers who'd been watching since 1997, that absence of death, that sustained survival, must have felt strange, like a familiar song missing its final note. You keep waiting for the resolution that never comes. And then season 12 ends, and you realize Kenny survived a whole year. Nobody said, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Not once. The catchphrase went unspoken, and somehow the show didn't lose anything for it. Kenny was still Kenny. The show was still the show. The gag's absence proved something important, that Kenny McCormick is more than his deaths. He's a character first and a gag second. He always was. We just needed a season without deaths to see it clearly. Season 13 brought Kenny back to the death count with 3 kills, and the first one, In the Ring, the season premiere, March 11th, 2009, is one of my personal favorites. Kenny starts dating a girl named Tammy Warner. The other boys warn him about the dangers. Cartman, without a shred of research, declares that the most bacteria-ridden place on the planet is the mouth of an American woman. Kenny and Tammy go through an entire arc involving purity rings and the Jonas Brothers, and at the end, when they finally engage in sexual activity, Kenny dies of syphilis. At his funeral, the cause of death is confirmed as a sexually transmitted infection. This is Kenny's first death by sex, and it's doing something that the early deaths couldn't do because the early deaths were random. This death is connected to desire. Kenny wanted something, pursued it, got it, and it killed him. There's a moral dimension here that the space station deaths never had. Not that the show is moralizing, it's not. But it's acknowledging that Kenny is a character with wants and drives, and that those wants and drives can have consequences. That's character development through death, which is, again, a sentence I never thought I'd write. Season 14 gave us the Coon and Friends trilogy, Coon 2, Hindsight, Mysterion Rises, and Coon vs. Coon and Friends, episodes 11 through 13, October 27th through November 10th, 2010. And this is where everything we've been talking about comes together. This is where Kenny's deaths stop being a gag and become mythology. By this point, we knew that Kenny's alter ego was the superhero Mysterion. This had been set up in Season 13's The Coon, where Mysterion's identity was left deliberately ambiguous. But in Mysterion Rises, Kenny is revealed as Mysterion, and his superpower is stated explicitly for the first time. He can't die. Or rather, he dies, but he comes back, every time. He wakes up in his bed the next morning, and nobody remembers. I want you to really sit with what this means, because it reframes everything. For 14 seasons, we watched a kid die over and over and thought it was a joke. And now the show is telling us, imagine what that's like. Imagine dying in excruciating pain, waking up, and having your best friends in the world look at you like nothing happened. Imagine going through that 100 times. Imagine knowing that your suffering is real, that your pain is real, that your death is real, and that nobody will ever acknowledge it. Nobody will ever remember. There's a moment in the trilogy where Kenny, as Mysterion, tries to explain to his friends that he's died before. They don't believe him. He says something like, "It's happened almost 100 times." And Kyle, who has literally watched Kenny die dozens of times, doesn't remember a single one. So Kenny shoots himself in the head in front of all of them, right there, to prove it. The boys watch in horror, and then cut to Kenny's mother jolting awake, screaming in pain, screaming, "It's happening again!" And we see her placing a newborn baby Kenny in his bed, in a fresh orange parka. I need to talk about what that scene does, because it might be the most important 30 seconds in the entire Kenny death mythology. For 13 seasons, we've been watching from the outside. We've been the audience. We've seen Kenny die, and then we've seen him alive again next episode. and we've accepted it the way we accept any convention. But in this scene, the show forces us inside Kenny's experience. We see what he sees. We feel what he feels. We experience the futility of trying to prove to people who love you that you're suffering and having them look at you blankly. That's not comedy. That's claustrophobia. That's the loneliness of being the only person who knows the truth. And when Kenny's mom screams, that's not a joke scream. That's labor. That's the physical agony of giving birth, happening for the 100th time, to a child she knows will die again. She's been doing this for years, maybe decades. She gives birth to Kenny, puts him in a parka, puts him to bed, and waits for the next death. And then she does it again, and again. And the only comment she makes is, "We should never have gone to that stupid cult meeting." Like it's a regret on the level of buying the wrong car. Like cursing your child with eternal death and rebirth is just a bad decision they made one weekend because there was free beer. That's the McCormick family for you. Everything in that house is broken. The marriage, the finances, the furniture, and now this too. Their son can't die. Or rather, he can die. He just can't stay dead. And they've adjusted to it the way they've adjusted to poverty. With resignation, with a shrug, with a beer. It's just another thing that happened to them. Another curse in a life full of curses. This scene ties directly back to Cartman Joins NAMBLA from Season 4, where we first saw the rebirth cycle. But now it has weight. Now it has pain. Now we hear Mrs. McCormick's anguished scream. Now we see the Necronomicon. Now we learn that Kenny's parents went to a Cult of Cthulhu meeting. For the free beer, they say. Because of course they did, this is the McCormick family. And that something happened there that cursed their child with immortality, with the inability to stay dead, and the inability to be remembered by anyone who watched him die. And here's where it gets really dark. Kenny's frustration in this trilogy isn't about the dying. It's about the forgetting. He can handle the pain. He's been handling it for years. What he can't handle is the loneliness of it. The isolation of being the only person who knows that this keeps happening. That's not physical suffering. That's existential suffering. That's the suffering of someone whose reality is fundamentally different from everyone else's, and who can never prove it, and who can never share it. The AV Club gave the finale a B+, noting that the episode satisfactorily resolved the question of Kenny's immortality. And I think that's mostly right, but I also think the resolution raises more questions than it answers. If Kenny's immortality comes from Cthulhu, what does that mean about the nature of his soul? If he's reborn every time, is each new Kenny the same Kenny, or a copy? When does his memory begin? Does baby Kenny remember dying? And if no one else can remember his deaths, what does that do to his sense of self over decades? The show doesn't answer these questions, and it doesn't need to. But they're there, underneath the surface, and they're what make Kenny's death gag one of the richest things in South Park. I want to spend some time here talking about something that's been building throughout this entire analysis, which is the relationship between Kenny's deaths and the concept of consequence in South Park. Because I think Kenny's death gag does something really interesting to the show's moral framework that doesn't get talked about enough. South Park is, at its core, a show about consequence-free behavior. Characters do terrible things, and usually there are no lasting repercussions. Cartman commits atrocities on a weekly basis and wakes up the next episode with a clean slate. Randy Marsh destroys his family and his town, and his own dignity. And by the next season, everything's fine. The show's satirical power comes from this lack of consequence. It's able to push ideas to their extreme because there's no narrative debt to pay. Characters can say and do anything because nothing sticks. Kenny's death is the exception. It's the one thing in South Park that does have consequence, or at least the appearance of consequence. Kenny dies. That's a consequence. His body is destroyed. His friends react. Something happened. But then the show undoes the consequence by bringing him back. So Kenny's death exists in this strange middle space between consequence and no consequence. It happens. It's real. It has emotional impact in the moment. And then it's erased. Over and over. And that middle space, I think, is actually the most honest depiction of how consequences work in real life. Because in the real world, consequences are also temporary. We experience loss, and then we recover. We grieve, and then we move on. The person stays dead, but our emotional response to the death eventually fades. The pain becomes bearable. The loss becomes normal. The empty seat at the table stops being a wound and starts being a fact. Kenny's death and return cycle is just that process sped up to 22 minutes. We grieve, we recover, we move on. Next episode. There's a concept in philosophy called the hedonic treadmill. The idea that humans return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of what happens to them, positive or negative. Win the lottery, you'll be thrilled, then you'll adjust. And you'll end up about as happy as you were before. Lose a loved one, you'll be devastated. Then you'll adjust, and you'll end up about as unhappy as you were before. Kenny's friends are on the ultimate hedonic treadmill. Kenny dies, they react, and by the next episode, they've returned to baseline. Their emotional response to death is perfectly calibrated to be temporary. And that's pretty much how humans work, isn't it? We like to think we'd be permanently transformed by loss. But the truth is, we're resilient in ways that are both beautiful and kind of horrifying. We endure, we adapt, we forget. Kenny knows this. He's the only character in the show who's aware of the cycle. He knows his friends forget. He knows his parents adjust. He knows the world moves on. And he keeps participating in it anyway. That's not naivety. That's acceptance. He's accepted that his suffering is impermanent in the eyes of others. And he's accepted that his return is invisible to the people who should notice it most. He's playing a game where nobody else knows the rules, and he's playing it with grace. Or at least, he's usually playing it with grace. The Mysterion trilogy is the one time he loses his cool. The one time the accumulated weight of all those forgotten deaths crushes him. And the release of that frustration, shooting himself in front of his friends to prove a point, is the most cathartic moment in the entire franchise. Because we've been waiting for it too. We've been waiting for Kenny to say, "I'm here. I've been here the whole time. And what you're doing, forgetting me, ignoring me, making my death a punchline, it hurts. It hurts every single time." Let me pause for a second. If you're still with me at this point, we've been going for a while. We're deep into this thing, and I want to acknowledge that. This isn't a casual watch. This is a marathon. And if you've stuck with me through the Season 4 Death Taxonomy and the philosophy of the hedonic treadmill, then you're the kind of viewer I love making content for. Seriously, thank you. Grab some water. Adjust your pillow. We're in the home stretch. Okay, let me go back to the chronological walkthrough for the later seasons. Season 14, outside the trilogy, also gives us Sexual Healing, the season premiere on March 17th, 2010. Kenny hears about autoerotic asphyxiation heightening sexual pleasure, ignores the warnings about the dangers, and tries it. He dies while wearing a Batman costume. The cause of death is essentially, he heard about a dangerous thing, thought, "That sounds amazing," and did it immediately. If that doesn't perfectly encapsulate Kenny's character, nothing does. He's the kid who runs toward danger, every time. And sometimes that's bravery. And sometimes that's recklessness. And sometimes you can't tell the difference. Season 15, One Death. The Poor Kid, Episode 14, November 16th, 2011. This death is incredible, and I need to give it the time it deserves. Kenny and his siblings have been sent to a foster home after their parents are arrested. And let me give you the context here, because the foster home subplot is doing something important for Kenny's character. For the first time in the series, we see Kenny outside of his comfort zone, without South Park, without his friends, without the bus stop. He's in a different town, in a different house, with different people. And the foster family is awful. The parents are those aggressive militant atheist types who punish the kids for saying God. Kenny's response is to protect his sister Karen. That's his only priority. Not himself, not his own survival. Karen. This is the episode where Kenny, as Mysterion, tells Karen he's her guardian angel. It's the episode that transforms Kenny from a gag character with occasional depth into a fully realized person with priorities and values and love. And then, After everything, the foster home, the separation, the return to South Park Elementary, after Kenny has endured all of this with quiet dignity, after we've seen him be a big brother in the truest sense of the word, Cartman sings a song about no longer being the poorest kid in school because Kenny is back. And then, out of nowhere, a giant reptilian bird smashes through the school roof, grabs Kenny in its beak, slams him against lockers, and flies away with him. 1 second Kenny is alive, and Cartman isn't the poorest kid. The next second Kenny is dead, and Cartman is the poorest kid again. The timing of this death is perfect. Not comedically perfect. Structurally perfect. Kenny has just been through the most humanizing arc of his character history. He's been a protector, a person with genuine depth. And then the show kills him with a giant bird, as casually as it killed him with a space station in 1997. It's the show saying, we can give Kenny all the depth we want. We can make him three-dimensional. We can make you care. And then we can take him away with a giant bird and a splatter of blood and a cut to Cartman singing. Because that's what this show does. That's what the world does. It builds you up and tears you down and doesn't care about your character arc. And here's what makes this death even more bittersweet. It's the first death that happens after we've seen Kenny as a genuine big brother. We've seen him promise Karen he'll always be there, and now he's being carried away by a bird. He'll come back, because he always comes back. But Karen doesn't know that. As far as Karen knows, her brother just got killed by a giant reptile in front of the entire school. And that image, Karen watching her brother get snatched away, is one that the show doesn't dwell on, but that I can't stop thinking about, because it connects Kenny's death to someone who depends on him, someone for whom his death isn't a gag or a catchphrase or a t-shirt, someone for whom it's just loss, pure, simple, devastating loss. And the fact that it happens in the same episode that established Kenny as her guardian angel, the protector who can never truly leave, makes it simultaneously hopeful and heartbreaking. He will come back. He always does. But she'll remember the moment she lost him, even if everyone else forgets. Season 16 gives us Kenny's first live-action death in I Should Have Never Gone Ziplining, Episode 6, April 18th, 2012, where the episode shifts to live action, and Kenny suffers a gruesome fate. This is the show breaking format and killing Kenny in an entirely new medium. And there's something wonderfully absurd about that. A character whose death has been animated in construction paper style for 15 years, suddenly dying in live action. It's like the gag has jumped dimensions. It's not content to kill Kenny in one medium. It wants to kill him in all of them. Okay, here's a tangent, but I think it's relevant. I've been thinking a lot about what Kenny's death would look like in different genres, and I think the show has actually explored most of them. He's had horror deaths, Pink Eye, the zombie episode. He's had comedy deaths, the baked potato heart. He's had tragedy deaths, Kenny dies. He's had political deaths, Best Friends Forever. He's had cosmic deaths, the Coon trilogy. He's had mundane deaths, hit by a car, shot by a stray bullet. He's had fantastical deaths, carried away by a giant bird. He's even had an off-screen death, put it down. The only genre of death Kenny hasn't really experienced is a natural one. He's never died of old age. He's never just stopped. Every death is imposed from outside. Something always kills him. He never just goes. And I think that's thematically consistent with who he is. A character whose agency is constantly being taken away by forces beyond his control. He doesn't get to choose when or how he dies. He just dies. And the lack of choice is the cruelty. There's actually a beautiful irony in post-COVID where adult Kenny finally does get to make a choice about his death. Or at least, he makes a choice that leads to it. He chooses to do the time travel experiment. He chooses to not wear his mask. And that choice, that tiny moment of human carelessness, is what kills him. After a lifetime of random, meaningless deaths, his final death has meaning. It has consequence. It has the weight of a decision behind it, and it costs him everything. I'll get back to post-COVID in a minute. The deaths become increasingly sparse from here. Seasons 17 through 20 had only a handful between them. And I think that sparsity is itself a creative choice. In the early seasons, Kenny's death was the reliable punctuation mark at the end of every episode. In the later seasons, his survival is the default, and his death is the exception, which means when it does happen, it carries all the accumulated weight of all those episodes where it didn't happen. Every episode Kenny survives adds to the impact of the episode where he doesn't. It's like compound interest, but for tragedy. In Put It Down, Season 21, Episode 2, September 20th, 2017, Kenny is killed off-screen by a driver texting on their phone. His picture appears among the victims in a tribute. It's a quiet death. No spectacle, no catchphrase, just a photo in a memorial. And there's something devastating about that. The loudest, most theatrical death gag in television history, ending in a silent photograph. In Bike Parade, Season 22, Episode 10, December 12th, 2018, Jeff Bezos tells Alexa to kill Kenny. Alexa does. And Cartman carries Kenny's coffin while riding his bike in the parade. The richest man in the world orders a machine to kill a child, and the child's friend treats the coffin as a prop. The technology that defines modern life casually killing a child at the request of the world's most powerful person. That's not a joke. That's a thesis statement about power and disposability, and the way technology mediates violence. I mean, it's also a joke, but it's doing work. And this death connects to something that's been true about Kenny since the beginning, but that I haven't said explicitly until now. Kenny is always killed by the powerful, by institutions, by technology, by the universe, by forces that don't care about him individually. He's never killed by someone who knows him, someone who targets him specifically, someone who means it personally. His deaths are collateral. They're systemic. They're the kind of deaths that happen to people who don't matter enough to be murdered. They're just killed. There's a difference. Murder implies intention. Killing implies indifference. Kenny is killed by indifference, over and over, for 28 seasons. And the indifference of the universe is the scariest kind of violence there is, because there's nobody to blame and nothing to fix. The universe doesn't hate Kenny. It doesn't even know he exists. It just kills him because he happens to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every time. Forever. And yet, he keeps coming back. He keeps standing in that place. He keeps being there. Not because the universe has gotten safer. Not because the odds have improved. But because Kenny McCormick has decided that being present is worth the risk. That living, even briefly, even painfully, even invisibly, is better than staying dead. And then there's The Pandemic Special, Season 24, Episode 1, September 30th, 2020. This is the big one. This is the COVID episode. The one where South Park addresses the pandemic head-on for the first time, after the show had been on hiatus since late 2019. The special was the most watched South Park episode in 7 years, pulling in over 2 million viewers on its premiere night. It was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. And in it, Kenny dies in a way that is, I think, the most political Kenny death in the show's history. Here's the setup. The pandemic has hit South Park. The kids are doing remote learning. Randy is dealing with the revelation that he caused COVID by having inappropriate relations with a pangolin in China. Long story. Classic Randy. The police have been equipped with military weaponry, and at some point, when the children try to break free from quarantine, the police open fire. And Kenny is gunned down. Let me repeat that. A child, in an orange parka, is shot to death by police officers carrying military-grade weapons. In an episode about the COVID pandemic, in September of 2020, 4 months after George Floyd, during a summer of protests against police brutality, against a backdrop of national conversations about the militarization of law enforcement and the state's willingness to use violence against civilians. This isn't a space station falling from orbit. This isn't turkeys pecking him to death. This is the state killing a child. And the fact that it's played as just another Kenny death, that nobody in the episode particularly reacts to it, that it's treated with the same casualness as a Season 1 alien blast, is the most devastating satirical choice the show could have made. Because that casualness is the point. That's how we talk about police killings. That's how we process them. with a catchphrase and a shrug, with thoughts and prayers and moving on to the next news cycle. Kenny's death in the pandemic special holds a mirror up to the way America processed the violence of 2020, and the reflection isn't flattering. Parker and Stone have always used Kenny's death as a mirror for the anxieties of the moment. In 1997, the anxiety was about media violence and its effect on children. In 2005, it was about the right to die and government overreach. In 2010, it was about the BP oil spill and corporate negligence. In 2020, the anxiety was, what happens when institutions meant to protect us start hurting us instead? What happens when the people with guns decide that children are the enemy? Kenny's death in the pandemic special is answering that question with the simplest, most brutal answer possible. They die, and nobody does anything about it. I want to make one more point about the pandemic special death before moving on. For 23 seasons, Kenny's death has been caused by random forces, accidents, natural disasters, animals, cosmic bad luck. The universe kills Kenny, but in the pandemic special, it's the government that kills Kenny. It's an institution, a system, the police. That shift from random to institutional, from cosmic to political, from bad luck to state violence, represents the final evolution of the Kenny death gag. It started as absurdist comedy about the randomness of fate. It ended as political commentary about the violence of systems. That's one hell of a journey for a gag about a kid in an orange coat. And then we get to South Park, post-COVID. The Paramount Plus special premiered November 25th, 2021, and it's the most ambitious thing the show has ever done with Kenny's death. Because this time, Kenny isn't a kid. He's an adult, 40 years in the future. The COVID pandemic has been going on for decades. Stan is an online whiskey consultant. Kyle is a school guidance counselor. Cartman has converted to Judaism and has a family. Jimmy is a late-night talk show host. Tweek and Craig are still together. And Kenny became a millionaire scientist. He's been working on the origins of COVID and on time travel, and he's dead. Again. But this time, it's different. Adult Kenny died from a new COVID variant called COVID Delta Plus Rewards. The name alone is peak South Park, a deadly disease named like a credit card loyalty program. His death is the catalyst that brings the old friends back together after decades of estrangement. At his funeral, which is presided over by Scott Malkinson, now a priest, the characters gather for the first time in years. And the emotional texture of this gathering is completely different from anything the show has done before. These aren't kids mourning a friend. These are middle-aged adults, broken by decades of living, trying to reconnect over a death that feels both familiar and final. Kenny's cause of death, a COVID variant, is itself a commentary on the randomness and stupidity of pandemic-era death. After a lifetime of being killed by alien lasers and space stations and turkeys and baked potatoes, Kenny's final death is caused by a virus, a microscopic organism, the most boring, most mundane, most 2020s way to die. And there's something almost offensive about that. The most creatively killed character in television history, done in by a virus. It's like watching a master swordsman slip on a banana peel. The absurdity isn't in the death. It's in the disproportion between what Kenny deserves, a spectacular death, and what he gets, a disease. But the special doesn't let that mundanity stand. Because when they finally find Kenny's research, on a flash drive hidden in his rectum, because some things never change, and honestly, if you've been watching South Park for 24 years, a flash drive in a dead man's butt is basically a handshake. They discover a video. In the video, Kenny's colleague explains that Kenny identified the cause of the dystopian future. It was Stan, Kyle, and Cartman. Specifically, the pandemic drove their friendship apart, and that broken friendship somehow set the world on a catastrophic course. Kenny devoted his entire adult life to figuring out how to travel back in time to save their friendship. Because that's who Kenny is. The kid who loves his friends. The kid whose last words were, "Where's Stan?" And here's the detail that really gets me. In the video, Kenny isn't wearing his parka. He's an adult scientist in a lab. His face is visible. His voice is clear, but he's still wearing something over his mouth. A face mask. A COVID face mask. Because of course he is. Because Kenny McCormick's mouth is always covered. Because this kid, this man, will never be fully heard. Even 40 years later, even as a millionaire scientist, even while trying to save the world, something will always muffle him. Something will always stand between Kenny and being understood. There's a moment in post-COVID that I think is the thematic culmination of everything we've been talking about tonight. When the boys discover that Kenny blamed them for the bad future, Stan says something that cuts right to the heart of the whole franchise. Let's face it, guys. We killed Kenny. Not they killed Kenny. Not the aliens. Not the space station. Not the turkeys. Not the universe. Us. We did it. By letting the pandemic drive us apart. By not being there for each other. By forgetting. The catchphrase that Stan has been saying for 24 years, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," finally becomes, "We killed Kenny." And the "we" includes everyone. The characters. The audience. The culture. We all killed Kenny. Every time we forgot. Every time we moved on. Every time we treated his death as a joke. And his suffering as content. We killed him. And then, the video shows Kenny's time travel experiment going wrong. He wasn't wearing his mask. His chin diaper, the show calls it. A malfunction kills all the scientists, and Kenny is teleported away briefly before returning, now infected with the new COVID variant. He dies off screen, having sacrificed everything to try to fix a friendship that his friends couldn't be bothered to maintain. Here's the thing about that death that I can't stop thinking about. For 24 seasons, Kenny died in ways that were absurd, random, violent, and meaningless. And then, in his final, most important death, he dies because of love. He dies trying to save his friends. He dies because he cared too much about people who cared too little about remembering him. That's not a gag. That's not a callback. That's a character arc that spans nearly 3 decades, and it's devastating. The follow-up special, The Return of COVID, released December 16th, 2021, eventually undoes the death through time travel. Because of course it does. This is South Park, and Kenny always comes back. But the emotional damage is done. We saw what an adult Kenny looks like. We saw what he became. We saw that underneath the orange parka, and the muffled voice, and the 100+ deaths, there was a person who grew up to be a scientist, and who gave his life trying to fix the world. And the fact that nobody remembered his previous deaths, the fact that nobody remembered the 100 times he suffered, makes his final sacrifice feel both inevitable and heartbreaking. He was always the one who gave everything and got nothing in return. He just kept doing it anyway. And I haven't even talked about the video game deaths yet, because Kenny dies in those too. In the 1998 South Park game for N64 and PlayStation, Kenny dies 4 separate times. His head is bitten off by the Iguana Entertainment logo in the opening. He's squished by a door while chasing a turkey, crushed by a falling robot head, and killed by a padlock safe at the end. In South Park, The Stick of Truth, the 2014 RPG, Kenny plays as Princess Kenny and dies when the player farts on Nazi zombie Princess Kenny's balls. In The Fractured But Whole, Kenny as Mysterion uses his death as an actual gameplay mechanic. His ultimate ability involves dying and being reborn. The video games have turned Kenny's death into a literal game mechanic. You press a button, and he dies. You wait a moment, and he comes back. The interactivity adds a new dimension to the gag, because now you're the one killing him. You're not just watching Stan and Kyle say the catchphrase. You're the one pressing the trigger. The complicity that the TV show suggested is now made explicit through gameplay. And there are the deaths in other media too. The short films, the live appearances, the promotional materials. There was a short for the 1998 New Year's Countdown, where the number 7 falls and crushes Kenny. There was a short for the 51st Annual Primetime Emmy Awards in 1999, where a giant Emmy statue falls on him. There's even a death in the music video for Kenny's Dead by Master P, where Chef and Master P run him over with a car. Kenny dies everywhere. He dies in every medium. He dies in every format. Television, film, video games, shorts, music videos. The death transcends the show. It's become a transmedia event, a cross-platform phenomenon. Kenny is the only fictional character I can think of whose primary characteristic, dying, has been expressed in every entertainment medium available. When you add all of them up, the 98 or so series deaths, the 2 movie deaths, the 12-ish short film deaths, the 14 video game deaths, and the title sequence deaths, you get somewhere between 128 and 199, depending on how generous you are with your counting. That range itself is interesting. We can't even agree on how many times Kenny has died. The number is both definite and indefinite, like death itself. We know it's a lot. We know it's more than anyone else. But the exact count depends on what you're willing to count as a death. And that question, what counts as a death, is maybe the most Kenny McCormick question you could ask. Does a dream death count? Does a title sequence death count? Does a death by proxy count? Like when Rob Schneider dies wearing Kenny's parka. Does a flashback death count? Does a video game death count? Does a death that gets undone by time travel count? The show's answer to all of these questions is yes, and also no, and also stop thinking about it. Which is, again, how most of us deal with the concept of death in our own lives. We try to count it. We try to categorize it. We try to draw lines between real death and not real death. And eventually, we give up and accept that death is messy and defies categorization. Here's something else I want to mention that might seem minor, but I think is actually significant. Kenny's death was significant enough to enter the scientific lexicon. A University of Strasbourg researcher named Sophie Rutschmann discovered a gene that causes fruit flies to die rapidly from bacterial infection, and she named it the Kenny gene, a real gene in real biology, named after a cartoon character who dies a lot. That's cultural penetration that most fictional characters never achieve. Kenny's death isn't just a pop culture reference, it's a scientific one. His legacy is literally written into our understanding of mortality at a genetic level. And Southern Illinois University philosophy professor Randall Auxier wrote an essay called Killing Kenny, Our Daily Dose of Death, in the book South Park and Philosophy. In it, he argues that Kenny's recurring death serves to make the viewer more comfortable with the inevitability of their own mortality. That by watching a character die and return so many times, we rehearse the cycle of grief and acceptance in a safe, comedic context. We learn that death is not the end, that the show goes on, that the bus stop will be occupied again next week, and maybe that makes our own mortality a little less terrifying. I think Auxier is right, but I think he's only getting half of it, because the other thing Kenny's deaths teach us is that our deaths might not matter to anyone, that we might die and the world might just shrug and move on, that our friends might yell a catchphrase and walk away while rats eat our body. And that's the scarier lesson. Not that we'll die, we know that, but that we might die, and it won't matter. That's the fear that Kenny embodies. The fear of meaningless death, the fear of being forgettable, the fear that the universe is indifferent, and our suffering is just content for someone else's entertainment. IGN ranked Kenny at number 6 on their list of the top 25 South Park characters. Number 6, not number 1. Not number 2, number 6. And you know what? That ranking is itself the most Kenny thing possible. He's not even the most popular character in his own show. He's 6th. He's in the background. He's the supporting player in a cast that's supposed to be a quartet of equals. Even in a ranking, even on a list, he can't escape the gravitational pull of his own marginality. And yet, Kenny keeps coming back. Every time. I think Kenny McCormick is the most underappreciated character in the history of American animation. Not just South Park, all of it. And I think his deaths are the reason why. Because his deaths turned him into a gag. And a gag can't be a character in most people's minds. We're conditioned to think of characters as people and gags as mechanisms. And Kenny was always both, but the gag was louder than the person. So people forgot about the person. They forgot that he's poor. Not sitcom poor, where the house is still nice, and the fridge is always full. McCormick poor, the kind of poor where the house is falling apart, where the parents are always fighting, where the dad is drunk and the mom is exhausted. The kind of poor that other kids notice and make fun of. Cartman makes Kenny's poverty a punchline in almost every episode he appears in. And Kenny takes it. He takes all of it. Because what else is he going to do? He's 8 years old, and his family has nothing. And his best friends forget he exists every time he dies. The poverty isn't just a character trait. It's thematically connected to the death gag. Poor people's suffering is invisible. Their deaths are invisible. They're the Kenny McCormicks of the real world, dying in the background of other people's stories. They forgot that he has a sister, Karen, who he loves unconditionally and protects as Mysterion. And I need to talk about this because the Kenny-Karen relationship might be the most quietly beautiful thing in the entire series. Karen was introduced in Best Friends Forever as just a face in the McCormick family, but she became central in The Poor Kid, Season 15, Episode 14, November 16th, 2011, when Kenny and his siblings are sent to a foster home after their parents are arrested. And in that episode, Kenny's first and only concern is Karen's safety. He makes sure she's okay. He looks out for her. And later, as Mysterion, he tells Karen that he's her guardian angel, that he'll always be there for her. And he means it. He literally cannot die. He will always come back. And he uses that curse, that horrible, lonely curse, to make a promise to his little sister that he can actually keep. I need you to sit with that for a second. Kenny's immortality is, in almost every other context, a source of suffering. It hurts. Nobody remembers. He dies in agony and wakes up alone. But with Karen, it becomes something else. It becomes a gift. Because the one thing Kenny can offer that nobody else can is permanence. He will never leave. He can't. No matter what happens, no matter how many times the universe kills him, he'll be back. And for a kid from a broken home with alcoholic parents and no money and nothing that works, for that kid to be able to promise his little sister, "I'll always be here," and actually mean it. That's the closest thing to hope that the McCormick family has ever produced. They forgot that he's the one who always pushes toward danger, not out of stupidity, but out of a weird, selfless bravery. They forgot that even Kenny's name has deep roots. Parker has said the character is based on a real kid from his childhood who was poor, wore an orange jacket, and would sometimes skip school. The other kids would joke that he had died, and his tombstone in the opening credits reads, "Sleep well, little child." The real Kenny, as far as anyone knows, is alive and well, but his fictional counterpart inherited the worst version of that joke. The joke that the poor kid disappears and nobody notices. Kenny McCormick is what happens when you make that disappearing kid literally disappear. They forgot that in the movie, his dying wish, his one wish from Satan, was to undo all the damage and save his friends, even though it meant staying in hell. They forgot that his last words were, "Where's Stan?" Here's the thing, if you strip away all the gags, all the gore, all the catchphrases, all the rats, and you just look at what Kenny does, he dies so others don't have to, over and over. He absorbs the universe's violence so his friends can live another day. He is, whether Parker and Stone intended it or not, the closest thing South Park has to a Christ figure. And the cruelest joke of all is that nobody in his world will ever know it. He puts on the parka and he goes to the bus stop and he waits for whatever horror is coming next. Not because he has to. He literally can't stay dead. But that's the mechanism, not the meaning. The meaning is that Kenny chooses to keep being Kenny. He keeps being friends with the people who forget he dies. He keeps living in the town that kills him. He keeps going. And maybe that's the most human thing in the entire show. Not the satire, not the commentary, not the cultural criticism. Just a kid in an orange coat who refuses to give up even though the universe keeps trying to make him. Let me talk about the movie before I wrap up, because the South Park movie, bigger, longer, and uncut, released June 30th, 1999, features what I consider the best Kenny death in the entire franchise. And I know that's a big claim, but hear me out. The movie itself is a masterpiece. I don't use that word lightly. It's a full musical, parodying Broadway conventions and Disney Renaissance films, with songs that are genuinely great. Blame Canada was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song, and Uncle Fucka is somehow both the most juvenile and most structurally ambitious song in animated film history. The film grossed $83 million at the box office, making it the highest-grossing R-rated animated film at the time. And at the center of it all is Kenny. Kenny dies early in the film. He bets Cartman $100 that he can light his fart on fire, imitating something Terrence does in the Terrence and Philip movie the boys have just seen. He tries it, catches fire, an ambulance arrives, but gets rammed by a salt truck that dumps salt all over Kenny, putting out the fire. And then at the hospital, the doctor, voiced by George Clooney, who had voiced Stan's gay dog Sparky in Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride before he was famous enough to negotiate a human role, accidentally replaces his heart with a baked potato. Kenny has about 3 seconds of life after revival, and then he drops dead. I rewatched this scene last week, and I noticed something I'd never caught before. When the doctor tells Kenny they replaced his heart with a baked potato, there's a beat, just a tiny beat, where Kenny looks at the doctor, and then looks at the camera, and then dies. It's like he knows. He's accepted it. After 2 seasons of dying in every conceivable way, having his heart replaced with a potato barely registers as surprising. It's just another Monday in the life of Kenny McCormick. But here's the thing about that line. The baked potato line. It's a reference to Parker and Stone's first feature film, Cannibal, the musical, from 1993. One of the songs in that movie contains the lyric, "My heart's as full as a baked potato." So Kenny's death in the South Park movie is secretly a callback to the creator's very first movie, made 6 years earlier as a student film. That kind of self-referential layering is something Parker and Stone love, and it means that Kenny's death in the movie is connected to their entire creative history. He's not just dying in the narrative, he's dying in the meta-narrative too. That death, the baked potato heart, is, on a pure comedy level, flawless. The setup, the payoff, the absurdity, the timing. It's a joke that works every single time. But what makes the movie Death special isn't the dying, it's what happens after. Kenny goes to hell, not because he was a bad person, but because he skipped church and did other minor infractions. And in hell, he meets Satan and Saddam Hussein, who are in an abusive relationship. And Kenny, the kid nobody remembers, the kid who dies every week, the kid whose suffering is invisible, becomes the emotional anchor of the entire B-plot. He's the one who sees that Satan is being manipulated by Saddam. He's the one who tries to help. He's the ghost who visits Cartman to warn the boys about the prophecy. He's the one who, at the very end, when Satan offers him one wish, wishes for everything to go back to normal, even though it means he'll be sent back to hell. Kenny's wish is entirely selfless. He could wish for anything. He could wish to come back to life. He could wish for wealth, for a better family, for the ability to speak without a parka muffling his voice. Instead, he wishes for the war to end, for the dead to come back to life, for the world to be healed. And because his wish was selfless, he's allowed to ascend to heaven. His face is finally revealed, properly, for the first time in the series, as light engulfs him, and he rises. Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead, provided Kenny's unhooded speaking voice in this scene, and his friends watch him go. And for once, they actually acknowledge it. For once, Kenny's sacrifice isn't invisible. There's a moment right before he ascends where Kenny says goodbye to his friends, and they hear him clearly for the first time. His parka is off, his face is visible, his voice is understandable, and in that moment, Kenny isn't the muffled kid anymore. He isn't the gag. He's a person, a real person, with a face and a voice and a choice. And he used that choice to save everyone he loves at the cost of his own happiness. That's not a cartoon death. That's a fairy tale death. That's the kind of death that heroes in mythology die. The selfless sacrifice that redeems the world. And it's given to the character that the show has spent 2 years treating as disposable. I want to take a second here to talk about what the movie does with Kenny's voice, because it's one of my favorite details in the entire franchise. Throughout the series, Kenny speaks, but we can't understand him. His friends can. Somehow, they respond to his dialogue as if they understand every word. But the audience is locked out. We're excluded from Kenny's interior life. We can see him, but we can't hear him. And in the movie, when the parka finally comes off, it's revelatory. Not just because we learn what he looks like. Blonde hair, nothing extraordinary, but because we can suddenly understand him. We're granted access to his thoughts, his words, his personality. And what we discover is that Kenny is kind. He's gentle. He's thoughtful. He's the kind of person who helps Satan with his relationship problems and wishes for world peace when given the chance. All that depth was there the whole time, hidden behind a muffled voice and an orange hood. We just couldn't hear it. That's a metaphor so obvious it almost doesn't need stating, but I'll state it anyway. How many people in the world are like Kenny? How many people have depth and kindness and wisdom that we never hear because we never bother to listen? How many Kennys are there in our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods? People whose voices are muffled by poverty, by social status, by the simple fact that nobody's paying attention. The movie gives Kenny a voice for 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds, he saves the world. Imagine what all the real-world Kennys could do if someone just let them speak. I think about the scene in the movie where Kenny is in hell, consoling Satan. Satan is heartbroken about his abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein. He wants to be free. He wants something better. And Kenny, the poorest kid in South Park, the kid who dies every week, the kid who has every reason to be bitter and angry, is the one who helps him. Kenny tells Satan he should leave Saddam. He actually gives the Lord of Darkness relationship advice. And it's good advice. Because Kenny, despite everything, is a fundamentally kind person. That kindness isn't celebrated by the show in the way Stan's leadership or Kyle's morality is celebrated. It's just there, quiet, muffled, like everything else about Kenny. The movie's Blame Canada lost the Academy Award to Phil Collins' Baptiste, You'll Be in My Heart from Disney's Tarzan. Parker and Stone were reportedly furious. Stone showed up to the ceremony wearing a dress, and they've said the loss was one of the most frustrating moments of their career. They spent the next season of South Park taking shots at Phil Collins, creating the character Phil Collins Hill and mocking him repeatedly. The pettiness is glorious and completely on brand. If you think about it, the movie is the proof of concept for everything that comes after. It's the first time the show demonstrated that Kenny's death could carry genuine emotional weight. It's the first time Kenny got to be a real character with real agency and real sacrifice. And it showed that the audience would accept that, would want that, from the kid who dies every week. Without the movie, I don't think Kenny Dies happens the way it does. Without Kenny Dies, I don't think the Mysterion arc happens. Without the Mysterion arc, I don't think post-COVID happens. The movie is the seed. Everything grows from there. And now I want to bring it all back to where we started. 128 deaths. Each one different. Each one telling you something about where the show was at the time, what the writers were interested in, what was happening in the world, how the audience had changed. The deaths are like tree rings. You can read the age and health of the show in the way Kenny dies. In the early seasons, the deaths are frequent and random and violent because the show was young and chaotic and didn't know what it was yet. In the middle seasons, the deaths slow down and get more meaningful because the show was maturing and learning that restraint has more power than repetition. In the later seasons, the deaths are rare and surgical, each one aimed at a specific cultural target, because the show has become a precision instrument of satire. And there's something else in those tree rings that I want to point out: the relationship between the death frequency and the show's cultural status. In 1997 and 1998, when Kenny was dying every single week, South Park was the biggest thing in pop culture. It was on the cover of magazines. It was the subject of think pieces and congressional hearings. The "oh my god, they killed Kenny" catchphrase was everywhere. On bumper stickers, baseball caps, calendars. It was a cultural moment. And the deaths were frequent because the show was new and aggressive and trying to prove something. By the mid-2000s, when Kenny was dying once or twice a season, South Park had settled into a different role. It was no longer the new outrage. It was an institution. It was a show that could win Emmys and comment on national tragedies in real time. And the deaths had become institutional too. Planned, purposeful, rare. The transition from chaos to precision mirrors the show's own maturation. South Park grew up, and Kenny's deaths grew up with it. I keep coming back to something that Trey Parker said in an interview once. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the exact quote. But it was something about how, when they started the show, the joke was killing Kenny, and as they got older, the joke became not killing Kenny. The absence of the gag became the gag. The expectation itself became something to play with. You watch an episode in season 23, and there's a little voice in the back of your head going, "Is Kenny going to die in this one?" And usually the answer is no. And that no has meaning because of all the times the answer was yes. I want to share something personal here, and I hope it doesn't sound too earnest, but I think it needs to be said. When I was younger, watching South Park for the first time, Kenny's deaths were my favorite part of the show. I'm not proud of that. I was 12 or 13, and watching a cartoon character die in creative ways was hilarious to me. I would describe the deaths to my friends at school the next day. "Did you see how Kenny died last night?" And we'd laugh about it. Now I'm older, and I've rewatched these episodes dozens of times, and the laughter is still there, but there's something else underneath it. An awareness that the thing I was laughing at was designed to make me uncomfortable if I looked at it long enough. That the show was always smarter than I was when I was 13. That Kenny's death wasn't just a gag for kids who thought cartoon violence was funny. It was a mirror for a culture that processes real violence the same way. We laugh, we say a catchphrase, we move on, and the person who died stays dead, and nobody remembers. I think that's the thing that makes Kenny's deaths transcend the show they're in. They're not just about South Park. They're about how we all deal with death, how we ritualize it, how we minimize it, how we turn it into content. Every time someone dies in the news, and we share a post about it, and then scroll to the next thing, we're doing what Stan and Kyle do at the bus stop. Every time a tragedy happens, and we say thoughts and prayers, and then go about our day, we're saying, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and moving on. The only difference is that Kenny comes back next week. In the real world, nobody does. And through all of it, Kenny endures. He dies, and he comes back, and he puts on the parka, and he stands at the bus stop, and he waits. He waits for the next alien blast, the next stampede, the next flagpole. He waits for the next death that nobody will remember, and the next rebirth that nobody will notice. And he does it with a muffled voice, and a quiet generosity, and a stubbornness that, if you look at it long enough, starts to look like grace. There's a game that Parker and Stone used to play in the writer's room, trying to come up with new ways to kill Kenny, and eventually, they got sick of it. Matt Stone said they were tired of figuring out ways to kill him. And you know what? I get it. Coming up with 100+ creative deaths is exhausting. But I also think they never fully understood what they'd created. Because Kenny's death isn't just a gag. It isn't just a running bit. It isn't just a catchphrase that became a t-shirt, that became a rap song. Master P's Kenny's Dead was featured on the Chef Aid album in 1998. And it's a genuine banger, by the way. It's a 28-season meditation on mortality, empathy, memory, and what it means to be seen. And the fact that it started as two college kids gluing construction paper together and making fart jokes is, honestly, kind of beautiful. The best art often comes from the dumbest places. I want to say something about what Kenny's death means for South Park as a whole, because I don't think it gets enough credit for what it does to the show structurally. South Park is, at its core, a show without stakes. Nothing matters. Nothing lasts. Cartman does horrible things, and nothing changes. The town gets destroyed, and it's rebuilt next week. Continuity is optional. Consequence is a suggestion. And in that zero-stakes universe, Kenny's death is the one thing that actually happens. It's the one piece of real consequence. Someone actually dies. A person is actually lost. And yes, it gets undone. And yes, Kenny comes back. But for the 20 minutes between his death and his return, the show has stakes. The show has weight. The show has something at risk. Kenny is the anchor that keeps South Park from floating away into complete nihilism. Without him, without his deaths, the show would be a cartoon where nothing matters at all. With him, it's a cartoon where one thing matters, and that one thing is enough. I also think Kenny's death does something crucial for the show's emotional economy. South Park can be incredibly cold. It can be mean-spirited, cynical, misanthropic. It can make you feel like the writers hate everything and everyone. And that's part of its appeal, the unflinching willingness to say what other shows won't. But a show that's only cold becomes unwatchable over time. You need warmth. You need heart. You need moments that make you feel something other than amused contempt. And Kenny provides those moments. Not through his dialogue. We can barely hear him. Not through his actions. He's usually in the background. But through his death. Because his death, when it's done well, forces the show to confront the thing it usually avoids. The fact that suffering matters. That people are fragile. That loss is real. Kenny's death is the show's conscience. It's the thing that reminds South Park, and its audience, that underneath all the irony and the cynicism and the fart jokes, there are people who hurt. And their hurt deserves to be taken seriously. Even if it's just for a moment. Even if the joke resumes immediately after. You know, I've spent weeks putting this video together. Rewatching episodes. Reading wikis. Checking dates. Making sure I've got the details right. And the thing that surprised me most wasn't any individual death. I'd seen them all before. It was the cumulative effect. When you watch Kenny die 100+ times in sequence, when you really sit with all of them, something shifts in how you see the character. He stops being the gag kid. He starts being the most tested person in fiction. Nobody has endured what Kenny McCormick has endured. Nobody has suffered as much, as often, as visibly, as invisibly, as persistently. And the fact that he keeps choosing to be present in his friends' lives, keeps choosing to show up at the bus stop, keeps choosing to care about people who forget him, that choice, made 100+ times, is the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in animation. It's a choice that says, my love for these people is bigger than my suffering. My desire to be here, to be part of this group, to stand in the snow and wait for the bus and listen to Cartman say something horrible. That desire is strong enough to overcome the fact that the universe has decided I should die. Over and over and over. That's Kenny. That's who he is. Not the orange parka. Not the muffled voice. Not the deaths. The choice to keep going, despite all of them. Here's what I'll leave you with. If you've been watching this in bed, if you've been listening to my voice while you're half asleep, I want you to think about this. Kenny McCormick has died more than any character in the history of fiction. More than anyone in Greek mythology. More than anyone in a video game. More than any comic book character. He holds a record that will probably never be broken. And the record is for suffering, for pain, for being forgotten. And he keeps coming back anyway. Not because he has to, because the show needs him to, because we need him to, because a group of friends standing at a bus stop in South Park, Colorado isn't complete without the kid in the orange parka. And maybe that's the final thing Kenny teaches us, that showing up is enough. That being there, even when nobody notices, even when nobody thanks you, even when you know you're going to get hurt, being there is an act of love. It's the most basic, most essential, most undervalued act of love there is. And Kenny does it every week, for 28 seasons, without ever asking for recognition, without ever getting it. And I think that's why Kenny resonates with people on a level that goes deeper than the comedy. Because we all know what it's like to show up for someone who doesn't notice. We all know what it's like to give our time, our energy, our presence to people who take it for granted. We all know what it's like to suffer quietly while the world talks about someone else's problems. Kenny doesn't suffer loudly. He doesn't demand attention. He doesn't insist on being seen. He just keeps showing up. And there's something in that consistency, in that stubborn, quiet persistence, that speaks to the part of us that keeps going even when we don't know why. I've talked to a lot of South Park fans while putting this video together, and the thing that surprised me is how many people have a personal connection to Kenny. Not to Cartman, who's the most quotable. Not to Stan, who's the most relatable. Not to Kyle, who's the most morally engaged, but to Kenny, the kid who dies. The kid nobody hears. And when I ask them why Kenny is their favorite, the answers are always some version of the same thing. Because he's the one who gets the least and gives the most. Because he's the underdog. Because he never gives up. Because he's proof that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most important one. There's a version of this video where I would try to rank every Kenny death. Best to worst. Most creative to least. Most emotionally impactful to most forgettable. But I'm not going to do that, because I don't think it's possible, and I don't think it would be fair. Every Kenny death is part of the same story. The flagpole death in Season 1 is connected to the baked potato. Death in the movie is connected to the Mysterion. Suicide is connected to the pandemic. Special shooting is connected to the post-COVID time travel accident. They're all chapters. You can't rank chapters. You can only read them in order and feel the cumulative weight of the whole. And that weight, after 28 seasons and 100+ deaths, is enormous. It's the weight of a character who has been killed more than any other character in fiction. It's the weight of a gag that became a philosophy. It's the weight of a kid in a parka who refused to stay dead, no matter how many times the universe tried to make him. I started this video with a number, 128. I'm going to end it with a different number, 1, because that's how many Kennys there are. Just one. One kid in one parka, at one bus stop in one small town in Colorado. One person who dies over and over, who suffers over and over, who loses everything over and over, and who keeps choosing to come back, to be there, to show up, to stand in the snow and wait for whatever comes next. One Kenny, 128 deaths, and the stubborn, beautiful, infuriating, heartbreaking insistence on being alive anyway. Until now. This video is my way of saying, I see you, Kenny McCormick. I see all 128 deaths. I see the flagpoles, and the space stations, and the turkeys, and the baked potato. I see the suffering you endure that nobody in your world remembers. And I want you to know, if a fictional character can somehow know, that it mattered. All of it. Every death. Every return. Every time you put on that parka and walk to the bus stop. It all mattered. And if that isn't something worth falling asleep to, I don't know what is. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I know it was a long one, probably the longest we've done, but I hope it gave you something to think about. Or at the very least, I hope it helped you drift off somewhere in the middle. And that's okay too. That's what these videos are for. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. It really does help more than you know. And we've got a lot more of these coming. Every like, every comment, every share, it means the world. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for.